Americans can watch. Welcome to the Cosmic Busker. My name is Bobby Codey. I'm calling this one the most important video Americans can watch. Can you handle the truth? The Democrats tried to censor a censorship hearing. Crazy. I never thought I'd be saying this in my life. A lifelong Democrat, let you know. Just so disappointed in everything they've done lately. They're just horrible. And we're going to see an example of that right now. The Democrats tried to censor a censorship hearing. And their behavior during this hearing was appalling. And we're going to go through it right now. This is a long hearing. This is the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government, I believe is the name of this committee. It's the House of Representatives, the United States House of Representatives. They have 535 members. Republicans are in charge. So they have most of the members on this committee. I think there's 18 members on the committee. And it's mostly Democrats, it's mostly Republicans. 10 Republicans, 8 Democrats. So the Republicans is a chairman. His name is going to be Representative Jim Jordan. And right next to him, he's the white dude in the blue. I think he's wearing blue. Next to him is the ranking Democrat, the highest ranking Democrat. Plaskett, I believe is her name, Representative Plaskett. She's the black woman. And we're going to analyze this, make a little bit of fun of some things that happen because it's pretty outrageous. But the reason this is so important is I want to talk about what this is, what this censorship hearing is about. Essentially, the hearing is about the weaponization of federal governments, where the federal government was going to social media companies and telling them, don't let this person say this, take this account down. Take this post down. Don't let this spread anywhere. Limit how far it's going. All this stuff. That's a violation of the Constitution of the United States. First Amendment, freedom of speech and freedom of press. And freedom of religion has been violated too lately. This First Amendment, and there's a reason it's the First Amendment. This is the most important amendment. It's the amendment upon which everything else depends upon. Without the First Amendment, everything else falls apart. And we become a totalitarian dictatorship, literally. I mean, that's just the way it is, and that's why our framers of our Constitution and our government instituted the First Amendment to the Constitution and the other amendments as well. So, we're going to take a look at this. It's just so bizarre. I clipped it so that it's as short as possible. The hearing went on for almost 4 hours. I clipped it so that we only get the important parts. I clipped some parts. Some of the Democrats were just so outrageous. They're just like blathering on about nothing. It's just so outrageous because you'll see, if you knock out Trump, conspiracy theory, and racism, the Democrats say nothing else. Trump, conspiracy theory, racism. Trump, conspiracy theory, racism. Trump, conspiracy theory. It's just over and over and over again. And it's just blathering on about that nonsensically when this is a censorship hearing and has nothing to do with the subject. It's just so bizarre. So some of that I chopped out, but the really interesting one is, and I hate this pejorative, but don't use pejoratives normally, and I hate all of them, including this one, but it fits. So from a social context, I'm going to show, the parts I'm going to show are where the Democrats are being Karens. All right? Where the definition of Karen is someone who makes unwarranted accusations and screams and yells and just nonsensical and hideous. That's going to be the Democrats in this. So we're going to try to have fun with it. I'm going to make fun of some stuff on here. I think you'll enjoy it. Try to make it as easy as possible. Like I said, I clip parts together. I have little arrows to point things out to make it easier. Sometimes I'll have stuff scrolling on the bottom. So let's enjoy this and let's get rolling with this. You know, look, the reason, before we go on, I just want to say the reason this is the most important video Americans can watch is because of how important this is. If the government takes away these rights, we're in trouble. I just want to reiterate that. That's why this is so important. Spread this, share, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And now let's get into the hearing. This is a clipped version of it I made. This is going to be 2.5 hours long. So sit back, relax, get your espresso, coffee, light up your smokes, whatever you got to do. This is going to be a long one, but it's going to be action-packed. You know, I clipped it down so that it's always going to be something going on. And I'm going to make few comments every so often as well. So let's get to work right now.
Subcommittee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Interesting, they do the Pledge of Allegiance. Democrats must hate it.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I thank the lady for leading us. Without objection, Mr. Roy will be permitted to participate in this hearing. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. On the third day of this administration, January 23rd, 2021, the White House sent an email to Twitter. The email said this: wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP, in all caps. That third day, what did that tweet say? Tweet from Mr. Kennedy said this: Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious deaths among elderly closely following administration of the vaccine. He received the vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. Now, what's interesting about the email that the White House sent to Twitter is the subject line says, flagging Hank Aaron misinformation. Now, misinformation is when you don't have the facts right. You're saying things that aren't true. But when you look at Mr. Kennedy's tweet, there was nothing in there that was factually inaccurate. Hank Aaron, real person, great American, passed away after he got the vaccine, pointing out facts. And yet the White House, on the third day, was trying, actually, 1:04 a.m. on January 23rd, 2021, 37 hours into the administration, they were trying to censor Mr. Kennedy. I find that interesting. The irony here, trying to censor the guy who's actually their Democrat primary opponent. Go figure. 3 months earlier, the FBI helped censor our second witness, Miss Morris's story. Her story in the New York Post about emails on the Hunter Biden laptop. And we know the FBI censored her because of work this committee has done to uncover what happened, and because of our third witness, Mr. Sauer, the lawsuit that he argued on behalf of Louisiana and Missouri in federal court, in a case that they got the amazing ruling from on July 4th, just 2 weeks ago. Go back to the course of that investigation, the course of that lawsuit from Missouri and Louisiana. Yoel Roth, former head of site integrity at Twitter, in his sworn declarations brought out in that lawsuit, in his sworn declaration in front of the Federal Elections Commission, he said this: during weekly meetings, federal law enforcement agencies communicated that they expected hack and leak operations before the 2020 presidential election, likely in October. These expectations were discussed throughout 2020. I also learned in these meetings that a hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. Now think about it. Weekly meetings throughout 2020, hack and leak operation in October involving Hunter Biden. 5 key things they pointed out throughout that year. And guess what? It all happens. It happens just like they predicted.
All right, I just want to point this out now. So what he's saying is, FBI had the laptop, they knew it was real, and despite the fact they knew it was real, they kept on telling social media companies, expect something about this laptop, but it's going to be fake, it's going to be a hack, it's going to be Russian disinformation. So they knew that it was real, and they lied to the public about this Hunter Biden laptop for months. And they lied to the social media platforms too, telling them it was going to be fake and expecting it because it was going to be Russian disinformation. Wow. I mean, that's wow. And they do that, why? So they can censor it when it comes out, which you're going to see in a moment. I just want to make sure everybody understands what he's saying here.
How did they know? How did they know it was going to happen like that? Because they had the laptop. They had the laptop for 10 months before Miss Morris's story on October 14th. Her story breaks that day. That same day, October 14th, 2020, Twitter meets with the FBI, specifically the Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI. Later that same day, again, the day her story comes out, Facebook also meets with the FBI. The head of the Foreign Influence Task Force now is Laura Demlow, and this committee interviewed her just 3 days ago. And what an interesting interview that was. We asked her about these meetings. She stated in the first meeting, the FBI and Twitter, in that first meeting, she said someone from Twitter asked, "Is the laptop real?" They asked a fundamental question. That story broke. It was big news. Twitter asked the FBI. They're right there in front of them. They've been prepping them for a year. They asked the FBI, "Is the laptop real?" Ms. Demlow conveyed to the committee this week, an FBI agent answered, "Yes, it is." Another FBI agent, a lawyer, very quickly followed up with, "No further comment." So again, here's the scenario. The story breaks. Twitter's meeting with FBI later that same day. Someone from Twitter asks, "Is this story real? Is the laptop real?" The FBI answers yes, and then quickly followed by, again, all this conveyed by Ms. Demlow. The FBI lawyer says, "No further comment." In the later meeting with Facebook, again that same day, the FBI was asked the same question, and this time, the FBI gets their story straight. Ms. Demlow is the only one who comments, and she says, "No comment." Obviously, by the second meeting, the FBI had coordinated, and she conveyed this in her deposition, that they had deliberated what they were going to respond when that question was asked. So think about this. After being repeatedly told a hack and leak Russian info operation is coming for a whole year, it arrives on October 14th in the form of Miss Morris's story, an accurate story. Our government knows the laptop is real. They know it's not a Russian information op, and they know the story is true. But when directly asked, they say no comment. And of course, Miss Morris's story is censored. Visibility filtered, the term that the tech companies use. No, you can't direct message, you can't send it. Keeping the American people from valuable information just days before the most important election we have, election for commander-in-chief, election for the presidency of the United States. That's why Miss Morris is here today. You know what? She knows what it's like to be censored. It's why Louisiana and Missouri filed the case. It's why Mr. Sauer argued the case. And frankly, it's why Mr. Kennedy is running for president. It's to stop. Help us expose and stop what's going on. This alliance, big government pressuring private entities to censor Americans. I think in Ms. Morris's testimony, which I read this morning, big tech, big government working together, big media working all together to censor American speech. So we look forward to your testimony over the next few hours. But I will tell you this, just get ready. I think these guys, Ms. Morris, get ready. Last time we had a journalist sitting there, they were trying to get them to divulge their sources. So be ready, but I know you can handle it. We appreciate your willingness to come forward. We appreciate your willingness to fight for the First Amendment. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone.
All right, so this is the ranking member, Plaskett, I believe is her name. She's the highest Democratic member, so she's going to give her opening statement right now. Watch.
Let's have some administrative matters first. I wanted to introduce into the record page 55 from the committee's interview with FBI employee Roya Demlow, who you just spoke about, which took place on July 17, 2023. In that line, she says, the question was asked, okay, if someone were to leave here today, were to leave this interview and were to suggest or imply that when you said the laptop was real, that it meant that the FBI had affirmatively determined in October 2020 that the laptop belonged to Hunter Biden, that the contents belonged to Hunter Biden, and that the contents had not been manipulated in some way, would they be representing what you said, correct? Answer by Ms. Demlow. They would be representing what I said because I don't have much knowledge of that. They would be misrepresenting what I said because I don't have much knowledge of that. Because this committee likes to misrepresent or leave off complete sentences of what individuals said, I'd like to introduce this into the record.
Without objection.
This time. Thank you. And as to no comment by an FBI, that's usually what they say when there's an ongoing investigation, particularly when it's a couple of days before an election. But why are we here?
All right, here we go.
Why? You know, that's been the question that quite a number of people have been asking me. Why are you having this hearing? What does this have to do with inflation? What does this have to do with the cost of living? What does this have to do with the everyday lives of Americans? The thing that the Republican Party said that they would focus on if they had control of the House. Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today? Specifically to Mr. Kennedy, a man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. Before that, in his film, Medical Racism, The New Apartheid, that film stated that COVID-19 vaccines do not work for Black children because of their, quote, kick-ass kind of immune system. That hyper, superhuman, subhuman kind of language. He also said, even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland. You could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did, to imply Jews in Nazi Germany had more freedoms than unvaccinated Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many of my Republican colleagues across the dais will rush to cover that they have Mr. Kennedy here because they want to protect his free speech, that they do not believe in American censorship. This is not the kind of free speech that I know of. The free speech that is protected by the Constitution's First Amendment. But free speech is not an absolute. The Supreme Court has stated that. And others' free speech that is allowed, hateful, abusive rhetoric, does not need to be promoted in the halls of the people's house. This Republican charge of free speech is being used by Republican members to promote quasi-science, things such as the replacement theory that says that brown people are replacing good white Americans here in this country. Let's not remember that this country first belonged to brown Native American people. It's a rallying cry for bigotry and hate. There are members of the Republican conference who also frequently suggest that Americans have to deal with COVID rules as the same as oppression of Nazi Germany. Indeed, some have even questioned whether the Holocaust took place. We have staffers who openly follow white supremacy without any condemnation of the Republican conference. Some give it chuckles, slaps on the back, shrugs, all under the mantra of free speech. It's a free country. You absolutely have a right to say what you believe. But you don't have the right to a platform, public or private. We don't have to give one of the largest platforms of our democracy, Congress, this hearing. Our right does not mean that we as Americans are not free from accountability. And that's what's distressing about this hearing. Even knowing what they know about Mr. Kennedy's hateful, evidence-free rhetoric, and even though they've invited any number of witnesses to make their point, Speaker McCarthy, Chairman Jordan affirmatively chose to give this a platform. They intentionally chose to elevate this rhetoric to give these harmful, dangerous views a platform in the halls of the United States Congress. That's endorsing that speech. That's not just supporting free speech. They have co-signed on idiotic, bigoted messaging. It's a conscious choice. There's no doubt as to why they're making the choice. It's not to guard free speech or to ensure equality for all. All of this, as you'll hear throughout this hearing, is to show us by their conduct over and over and again that any attack on Joe Biden to get Donald Trump back in the White House is what they need to do. They think that by hurting the Biden administration.
I just want to stop right there. She mentioned idiotic. I'm going to comment later, but she mentioned idiotic, bigoted messaging. It's like they're talking about themselves. It's just so bizarre. But let me let her finish. I want you to get a good sense of set the tone with some of these people and what they're going to say. It's just ridiculous.
By putting Mr. Kennedy on display, they have said that he's only running for censorship. I think people run for the President of the United States because they want to advance the American people. Over the last 8 months, the extreme MAGA majority has spent its time, not to mention tons of taxpayer money, something that they're always so cautious about, on baseless investigations that have gone nowhere, all in an effort to serve as a legislative arm of the Trump campaign and discredit any agency that dares to hold the president or those that work with him or who have the same ideals that he has accountable for those that are such as white supremacy, such as election deniers, such as inciters, and those who engage in the riots of January 6th. Truth be told, I have no idea whether the chairman actually believes any of the stuff. I don't. That's not a question I've asked him or one that's necessarily even important. But it's clear that one aim of his investigation is to bully tech and media companies into turning a blind eye to right-wing extremist conspiracies, from QAnon to the Great Replacement theory, as they spread across their platforms, even when those theories violate very basic terms of service about deliberate disinformation and promoting violence. Let's not even think about what happens in 2024 with Russian trolls, Iran, China trying to interfere in our elections. And the bullying extends far beyond tech companies. Witness after witness have testified to the treatment they received from Chairman Jordan and his team. One of our earliest witnesses, Nina Jankovic, told the committee about receiving thousands of death threats and being told to go into hiding while she was pregnant with her first child, after Chairman Jordan first posted a doctored video of her. When Politico asked Mr.
I just want to add in, they're talking about Nina Jankovic. She's the one, I'm almost certain, who she wanted to have a Department of Information, essentially, or Department of Censorship, where they would literally have a department, an official department in the government that would go to the social media companies and tell them what to say and not to say, and allow to be said and what not to allow to be said. Okay? That's who she is. That's who they're talking about. So, this is one of the most vile people you could ever imagine. So somehow she's defending somebody who believes that the government should determine what facts that you listen to. That's who she's defending, which is what they're going to defend this whole thing.
Jordan about the threats, his office responded, she deserves to be held accountable. Anyone who doesn't agree with their point of view deserves whatever hatred and threats are thrown at them. Now, I'm across the hall from Mr. Jordan, and several months ago, I saw somebody who seemed to be threatening to his office, and the Capitol Police were moving them away. And I was grateful that they were doing that, because I don't want anyone to harm him or his staff for their rhetoric, for the things that they say. That's inappropriate. That's unconscionable. Another witness, this one a current member of federal law enforcement, who spent years protecting Americans from harm,
if she had any
described receiving threatening mail not just to her work office, but to her home address. Someone out there has figured out where this person lives and is targeting them based on disinformation this committee itself spread. She summed it up in a single sentence: I'm frankly scared. And why does the chairman send this movement to intimidate witnesses? To change their behavior, of course, to make it less safe for law enforcement officers to enforce the law, and less likely that researchers and companies will combat the spread of hate and violence online. One witness, an academic whose organization helped identify disinformation threats to election processes and procedures, described the threats sent to him and his family in detail. When the Republican staff asked him if he would consider performing the same research for 2024 elections, he said, quote, "Since this investigation has cost the university now approaching 7 figures in legal fees, it's been pretty successful, I think, in discouraging us from making it worthwhile for us to do a study for 2024. Another witness, a researcher who analyzed massive data sets to assess the way that rumors spread online, was explicit and personal about the effect of the threats on her life. I mean, quite frankly, I don't have kids. And if I did, I would no longer be doing this work. I'm worried about my students. I know they're worried about doing this kind of work because of these kinds of threats and what they see that I'm going through. And at the same time, I just think the work is so important, and I want to make sure it keeps going. So I don't want to step off that stage. I think we have like special skills that can be really useful and helpful and help our country grow stronger. And this is having a chilling
censorship.
effect.
Why
And
was
it's
she
not
mentioned?
just me.
She's talking,
Other
victim.
researchers are
It's
experiencing the same
just
thing.
like,
These are the fruits of this committee's majority investigations. If MAGA Republicans agree with you, you're given a platform to spread any conspiracy theories, no matter how harmful. And if they disagree with you, you get death threats until you have to go away. These folks have a plan. They want to force social media companies to promote conspiracy theories because they think that's the only way their candidate can win the 2024 election. They want to bully the experts into abandoning their work on disinformation to pave the way. They want to give expression to the most vile sorts of speech here in this committee room because it prepares the ground for their own conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. And they apparently don't care how many people are hurt or die as a consequence of their actions, either through lies about vaccines or threats to the safety of witnesses, because nothing is more important to them than power. It's a free country. Well, Chairman.
all right. 2 things I want to comment on here. First of all, notice everything is chump, racism, conspiracy theory, chump, racism, conspiracy theory, racism, chump, conspiracy theory. Everything over and over and over again. No concern for truth whatsoever, no concern for the actual facts. Hold on. 1820.
Lies about vaccines or threats to the safety of witnesses, because nothing is more important to them than power. It's a free country.
All right. So they mentioned conspiracy theory and all that stuff, and racism, chomp, racism. And there, right there, she also mentions power. Okay? You have to realize this. There's a reason why I'm showing this. And because that's all they know. Okay? The current leftist Democrats, all they know is power. They don't care. They will trash everything, step on all treasured institutions, all law, all everything. They care about power. That's why she brings up power. They consistently, they talk about racism all the time because they're racist. They talk about power all the time because they're power hungry. And that's what you'll see over and over again. That's all they care about. And that's what this is going to show. Because people who only care about power, they will lie, of course, to get power and do other inappropriate things. And their lies just can't hold it. There's all kind of inconsistencies and hypocrisies. And it shines forth. That's why I'm showing this. We're going to see that right here in the total way that the Democrats handle this. And doing it to one of their own, too, Robert Kennedy. It's horrible. Let me let her continue now.
Chairman Jordan, Mr. Kennedy are free to say whatever they want. It's the chairman's right to promote any of the views he wants to promote. But that freedom doesn't mean that the rest of us can't see what they're doing and demand something better from our representatives, from my colleagues, from this Congress. Be better than the witnesses, my colleagues. Let's be better. Let's get about the business, the real business of the American people. Stop the division, the divisiveness that is being promoted through this committee. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back up and asks unanimous consent.
All right, again, she says, and then again, just like I said, how they talk about themselves, be better than the witnesses. Well, the Republicans have essentially 3 witnesses, okay? Democrats have 1. Look, I think they're going to introduce them right now. She's saying, be better than these witnesses. The only witness that everybody can be better than is the witness the Democrats brought, because she's horrible. The 3 other witnesses the Republicans bring, who they're going to introduce in a moment, which includes Robert Kennedy Jr., they're well above par. They do awesome integrity. They speak the truth, and you'll see that in a moment. And lies and hypocrisy are obvious, and we're going to point them out as this goes on.
The record from page 29, Ms. Demelow's testimony from 3 days ago. Question, do you recall whether any of these social media companies you were meeting with asked you any questions about the laptop story? I do was her answer. And what is your recollection? Somebody from Twitter essentially asked whether the laptop was real, and one of the FBI folks who was on the call did confirm that, quote, yes, it was, before another participant jumped in and said no further comment. Question, do you recall who from the FBI said it was real? I do. And who was that person? I'll have to get back with you. Without objection, we'll enter that into the record. We now want to introduce our witnesses. I want to start with Ms. Emma Jo Morris. Ms. Morris is politics editor at Breitbart News. She previously served as the deputy politics editor at the New York Post, where she authored the Post coverage of the Hunter Biden laptop and its contents in 2020. Ms. Maya Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She previously served as counsel to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and at the American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. We welcome you as well, Ms. Wiley.
She's the Democrat witness, okay? So she's representing, for some reason the Democrats brought in someone from the ACLU in a hearing about censorship. Okay. Well, anybody like myself who knows the ACLU and their history, they've always been pro-civil rights, First Amendment. They used to support Nazis. If Nazis were being censored, ACLU would give them a lawyer and support them. They were so in support of First Amendment rights. Everybody hated Nazis, even the ACLU. You know what? I believe in the First Amendment right that everybody has a right to speak. And really that makes sense because, the views are so atrocious. Yeah, I want to hear their voices, so I know that these, I don't want to be any part of these Nazis. You know what I mean? You want to expose horrible views as well, so that you can analyze. And we'll see, unfortunately, that the Democrats tends to be the one with those horrible views, as all they think about is Trump, racism, conspiracy theory over and over again. So she's from the ACLU, but it's ironic. She's coming on here, though. She's going to do the opposite. She's going to argue for censorship. ACLU is now arguing for censorship. This is, it's in their name, this American Civil Liberties Union. They're supposed to stand up for American civil liberties. They had this high integrity in the past, like I just gave the example of. She's here for the Democrats to argue against it. Right there, you can see how loony this is and how loony the Democrats are. That's all you have to hear right now. And she's going to be twisted up and everything's going to be racism. What's racism have to do about censorship? See, it's chop, conspiracy theory, over and over again. It's a mind war. mind virus. They just can't think. Or they're just programmed to say what they're told to say. It's horrible. But you're going to see she's going to get so tied up in her inconsistencies. It's incredible. So we'll continue to let this go on.
John Sauer is the Special Assistant Attorney General for the Louisiana Department of Justice, and he is one of the lead lawyers in the Missouri v. Biden case that I referenced in my opening statement. He previously served as Deputy Attorney General for Special Litigation with the Missouri Attorney General's Office and Solicitor General of Missouri. He clerked for Judge Michael Ludig and Justice Antonin Scalia.
All right, this guy now they just introduced now, Sauer, that guy. He is AG, I think they said in Louisiana. He sued the federal government for censorship. And he got the government to look at all this information, and we're going to hear about that in a moment. So he sued the federal government because they were censoring. And we'll see what the judges and everybody says about that. I mean, it's crazy. It's something I'd never thought I would experience in America. It's outrageous. But the Democrats did. Let's watch.
Witness is Mr. Kennedy. I will turn to our colleague, Mr. Roy, member of the Judiciary Committee, and waved on to the Subcommittee to introduce Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chairman. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the son of a former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of America's 35th President, John F. Kennedy. The third of 11 children. He graduated from Harvard University. We won't hold that against him because he went on to receive his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, my alma mater, as an undergraduate. Some viewing Mr. Kennedy through his last name. But that does a tremendous disservice to his life's work, whether you agree with it or not. Out of law school, Mr. Kennedy built his career as an environmental lawyer, representing New York City environmentalists and environmentalists across the globe in numerous legal battles. His work culminated in the landmark New York City watershed agreement focused on cleaning of New York City's waterways. After the 2008 election, Politico reported that President-elect Obama strongly considered Mr. Kennedy to head the Environmental Protection Agency. He went on to found Children's Health Defense, a national organization intended to address childhood chronic disease and toxic exposures. I assume that being a father of 7, in addition to being one of 11 children himself, fuels his interest in children's health. Following the 2016 election, Mr. Kennedy met with then President-elect Trump to discuss his potential for a committee to examine vaccine safety and scientific integrity. Their conversation also touched on the CDC and ways to increase independence from financial conflicts. Most recently, Mr. Kennedy announced his campaign for President of the United States. During his campaign announcement, he stated, quote, "My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism in our country," end quote. It is for this that Mr. Kennedy...
Merger of state and corporate power. Fascism. The Democrats, ironically, again, I talked about how they always point the fingers. They're kind of like Nazis. Merger of state and corporate power. We'll see that. That's exactly what this is about, too. You know, the two getting together to stop the American people from being able to know the truth.
He finds himself receiving the scorn of both the political left and right. Because if one dares challenge the orthodoxy of the powers that be, then one is their enemy. As a graduate of the University of Virginia, Mr. Kennedy no doubt knows the following quote, For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead. Thomas Jefferson. That truism was lost during the COVID pandemic. Individuals receiving scorn simply for asking questions. People being silenced for challenging the status quo. These are the kinds of questions that should have been publicly debated, and this hearing is focused on that truth, and we welcome Mr. Kennedy.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Kennedy. We're glad you were here. We will now proceed with open statement. But before I do, I want to introduce the guy sitting behind you, Mr. Kennedy, who is a former colleague of ours, and maybe more importantly for me, a good friend of mine, Dennis Kucinich, who served the United States Congress for 14 years, I believe, and great Buckeye. So we welcome Dennis, and I know Elizabeth's here as well. We appreciate you.
That's Dennis right there, his hand up. I just want to mention, he is one of the great politicians America's ever had. And just to show, he is Robert Kennedy's campaign manager. He was an Ohio congressman. He's generally considered one of the most liberal politicians in America, okay? But he's not like the rest of them who are nuts, these new Democrats who are crazy, who are watching. He's a good liberal. He believes in the First Amendment. He believes in free speech. He believes in people being able to talk. Now, he's really liberal. As they're going to talk about in a moment, they're going to talk about him. He's literally liberal. He's a Democrat. The guy who's chairing this, Jim Jordan, he's a super conservative, right? They were a congressman together, okay? Dennis Kucinich right here with his hand up, and the chairman, Jim Jordan, complete opposites politically, far right, far left, worked together in the House, good friends. No problems with each other, used to go to each other's, others' events. They'll talk about that later. But the whole point here is that there's an animosity and a name-calling and a destruction of character that is indicative of people who only care about one thing, and that's power. And that's what we're seeing. And that's what they're calling for. And so, but regardless, Dennis Kucinich is a class guy with integrity. He's a good liberal. He's one of the Democrats I love. As a lifelong Democrat, I might add.
Service, Dennis, and your commitment to the First Amendment. We'll now go with opening testimony. Mr. Kennedy, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Excuse me, point of order. I know that witnesses usually have 5 minutes. I see 10 minutes on board. Is it going to be 10 minutes?
We'll give him 5 minutes, but we're pretty lax with this. We'll let him go for...
We are?
Yeah.
I've seen you gavel down on quite a number of witnesses.
Given senators and former Democrat members of Congress and all kinds
He's
of folks.
neither. He's neither.
I'm just saying in past history.
Okay.
We'll give
watch
you
the time for all the witnesses.
And if you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job. That's your job. Why don't you threaten a witness so that they...
That's great. That's great. Throughout this, there's the Democrats trying to censor again. I think I cut it off in the beginning. In the very beginning, the Democrats tried to censor. They tried to censor again and again and again. Throughout this video, they try to censor. They're trying to censor a censorship hearing. It's just, they have no shame whatsoever. And here she's doing it right away. They gave Kennedy, because out of respect for him, they were going to give him 10 minutes instead of 5, and she's complaining.
With this,
so that's
we'll
what
let him go for...
We are?
Yeah.
I've seen you gavel down on quite a number of witnesses.
Given senators and former Democrat members of Congress and all kinds
He's
of folks.
neither. He's neither.
I'm just saying in past history.
Okay. Let's watch
you
the time for all the witnesses.
And if you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job. That's your job. Why don't you
Everybody's
threaten
laughing.
a witness so that they can not want to be a
Mr.
witness?
Kennedy is recognized for his opening statement. We'll give him 5 minutes, more or less, and then we'll move to the next one. Mr. Kennedy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could put 5 minutes on the clock then, not 10.
Put 5 on the clock and start it on it.
No shame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to put aside my written statement for a moment and address one of the points that was brought up. I think an important point by the ranking member, that this body ought to be concerning itself with the issues that impact directly the American people. The rising price of groceries, 76% over the past 2 years for basic foodstuff, the war in Ukraine, the inflation issues, the border issues, many other issues that concern us all as a nation. We can't do that without the First Amendment, without debate. When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you, and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that could be was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration, I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It awarded a truthful, and by the way, they had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced. The peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I publish. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government, that they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel, for the protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today. I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association, which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. Now, I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today. And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the way that the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you, all the things that I'm accused of right now by you, and in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. So I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
He mentions gaslighting, and that's exactly what the Democrats do this whole time. Trump, racism, conspiracy theory. Trump, racism, conspiracy theory. Unbelievable. Oh, this is going to be great. Remember how many times they tried to censor him? Here comes the most hideous woman in American politics. She's so horrible. I'm going to show you one thing. She's so corrupt. So corrupt. Wasserman Schultz is her name. And we're going to find some information about her right now. Right, here's something about the hideous woman. Deborah Wasserman Schultz, declared most unethical politician. She's horrible. Just hideous in every single way possible. But where is it? I'm trying to find... yeah, here it is. The Imran Amwan story is unbelievable. The media completely ignored it. I'm going to do research on that right now. All right, here it is. I don't want to go into too much about this, but it's really creepy. Here it is right here. Here's the hideous woman again. And Here's the headline: Wasserman Schultz aide arrested trying to leave the country. When she was in a powerful position in the House, when the Democrats controlled it, she had an Indian, Imran Awan, as I showed you was his name. He was their IT person, and he had access to all types of tops, really confidential, secret stuff, essentially. And it was outrageous. He was just doing whatever he wanted with it. Some people think he was selling it, access to information on here. He wasn't even, at one point, I don't think he wasn't even in America running the operations. He was like in India, and he was getting paid hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars a year for doing nothing. It's just this really creepy story. If you want to take a look at it, there's a lot of information, a lot of garbage about it. But it's really creepy. Here, House staff are at the center of a criminal investigation, potentially affecting dozens of Democratic lawmakers, because he had all their IT stuff, and he was arrested. It's just really bad. It's really creepy the way this all happened. I don't want to go too much into it, but I want to give you a background just on how corrupt she really is before we continue and take a look at the rest of her here. So let's bring this back up. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. She's really hideous. So just so that you don't have to worry about her being hideous, I'll make it easier to look at her. And it's going to be a much more pleasant thing to look at than the hideous Wasserman Schultz. So enjoy.
I'd like to raise a point of order.
Gentlelady can state her point of order.
I'll do it every time she comes in.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Gentlelady can state her point of order.
Point of order pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of. I move that we remove into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week. Rule 11, Clause 2 says, whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy,
trying to censor him again.
Among many other things, has said,
Which
I know a lot
Wasserman.
now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
Lady making a motion or a speech?
I made a motion to move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy's testimony
Mr. Chairman, I
and
move
his
to table
previous
the motion.
statements...
Gentleman from Kentucky has moved to table.
All right, they voted down.
Questions on
Mr.
the-
Chairman, I
She
ask
tries
for
to
a roll
censor
call
them
vote
and
on
they
the
vote
motion
no.
to table.
Well, let me ask
Republicans
the
all
question.
vote.
The questions on the motion to table.
No,
The
don't
gentlelady
censor.
has
All
asked for a
Democrats
roll call
vote censor.
Thank you.
Republicans
Thanks
win.
so much for inviting me.
This is
My
Ms.
name is
Morris.
Emma Jo Morris, politics editor at Breitbart. I'm here today because I published a series of news stories 3 years ago in October of 2020 about Hunter Biden's now infamous laptop, also known as the laptop from hell, which is seen as some of the most scandalous reporting of the last decade. What was more scandalous than the reporting itself, though, was the fact that it exposed the unholy alliance between the intelligence community, social media platforms, and legacy media outlets. At the time, I was deputy politics editor at the New York Post, and my reporting showed that despite then candidates Joe Biden's repeated and furious denials, he was apparently involved in the foreign business deals of his family. Over several days, just weeks before Americans would vote for their next president, I revealed verified, authentic emails from the Biden Scion's hard drive showing Ukrainian business partners receiving leaks from the Obama White House. I documented an off-the-books meeting between then Vice President Biden and a Ukrainian energy executive and introduced the world to the big guy who got action on a deal with CEFC, China Energy Company. The Post published exactly how the material for the reporting was obtained, even identifying our sources, as well as a federal subpoena showing the FBI was in possession of the material the story was based on and had been since December of 2019. But when the stories appeared on social media that morning, the venue where millions of Americans go to find their news and editors to get their angles, within hours, the reporting was censored on all major platforms on the basis of being called hacked or Russian disinformation. Twitter refused to allow users to share the link to the stories, banned the links from being shared in private messages, a policy, by the way, that's used to clamp down on child porn, and locked the post out of its verified account. Facebook said it would curb distribution and reach of the links on its platform. However, the stories were not based on hacked materials, nor were they Russian disinformation, and despite those claims appearing to come out of thin air at the time, we would eventually learn that they actually didn't come out of thin air at all. On October 19th, 5 days after the Post began publishing, Politico ran a story headlined, "Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intel officials say." God, I can't even say that with a straight face, you know?
It is so
Politico
stupid.
printed a letter completely uncritically
That's
from
Democrats.
veteran members of the U.S. intelligence community, falsely claiming that the Post expose has, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. God.
So she's the one who wrote the article, and they're saying it's all Russian propaganda. It's she's like, I wrote it. What are you? I'm American. It's just so ridiculous. It's why it's so funny. The lies by the other side are so outrageous.
Notable among the signatories of that letter were Jim Clapper from former DNI, Michael Hayden, former CIA, John Brennan, former CIA. Despite having such damaged credibility following their participation in the Russia collusion conspiracy theory. A few days later, on October 22nd, when Biden appeared in the second presidential debate and was confronted with the facts of the Post reporting, he said to Trump, quote, 50 former national intelligence professionals said this. What he's accusing me of is a Russian plot. But it was not. And he knew that. Now, fast forward to this year, 3 years later. Just last spring, House investigators revealed it was a call by now Secretary of State Antony Blinken to former acting CIA Director Michael Morell that prompted the spy letter published by Politico, which bypassed agency approval processes that would have been normally applied. It is also now known that ahead of my reporting, federal agencies were priming social media companies to execute an operation to discredit it. According to internal documents released by Elon Musk upon his acquisition of Twitter, the FBI and other intelligence community members essentially directed the platform's censorship operation, in part externally by working with top management and in part internally by social media companies hiring eye-popping numbers of agency alumni. Journalist Michael Schallenberger reported, based on documents he obtained from Musk, that during all of 2020, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies repeatedly primed Twitter executives to dismiss reports of Hunter Biden's laptop as a Russian hack and leak operation. Feds arranged for top secret security clearances to be granted to Twitter management and even had encrypted messaging networks set up, which they dubbed a virtual war room. To this day, hundreds of people from the intelligence community work at social media companies. Over the last few years, my reporting has been confirmed by virtually every mainstream news outlet, from the Washington Post to the New York Times to Politico, when the stakes were nothing, by the way, 2 years later. No one denies that
In other words, it doesn't matter now. She put this out just before the election. They didn't want it affecting the election. They didn't want to know people know the truth about the Bidens, so they hid it until Biden got elected. Once he got elected, they said, all right, well, we don't care. We're in power. There's nothing you can do to us.
laptop is real, that the origin story is exactly what I told you it was in the first place. This elaborate censorship conspiracy wasn't because the information being reported on was false. It was because it was true, and it was a threat to the power centers in this country. What this relationship between the U.S. government officials and American corporations represent is an unprecedented push to undermine the First Amendment, the right to think, write, read, say whatever we want. And how we respond will determine whether we see a free press as inalienable or as optional. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Mr. Sauer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. On July 4th, 2023, Independence Day, Judge Terry A. Doty of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Louisiana entered a historic injunction against the White House and other federal officials. This injunction prevents them from, quote, urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing in any manner the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech posted on social media platforms. Judge Doty's opinion contains 82 pages of detailed factual findings, supported by 577 citations of the evidence, which is drawn from roughly 20,000 pages of the federal government's own emails and communications with social media platforms and 6 full-length depositions. In its recently filed stay motions, the government has hardly bothered to dispute any of these factual findings. The Court of Appeals has entered a, quote, temporary administrative stay of this injunction and granted expedited briefing and argument on August 10th. Contrary to some recent suggestions, a temporary administrative stay is, quote, routine practice in the Fifth Circuit. That's a direct quote from the recent decision in N. Ray Abbott, and it does not reflect any judgment of the merits. Today, I want to offer 7 observations drawn from the Louisiana opinion. First, the Louisiana court found, based on overwhelming evidence, that federal officials are the cause of the censorship of the viewpoints they disfavor. The government likes to claim that social media platforms acting on their own would apply their policies and censor all this content anyway. This is demonstrably incorrect. Again and again, the Louisiana court found that the platforms would not have suppressed this speech, but for the fact that the federal officials were pushing for it. The deplatforming of Alex Berenson, the throttling of Tucker Carlson's content, the silencing of the so-called disinformation dozen, which includes Mr. Kennedy, the suppression of much of the so-called borderline, which is, quote, often true content on Facebook's platforms, the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, and much more. All these were suppressed because of the efforts of federal officials. Second, the scope and reach of federal censorship is staggering. As the Louisiana court repeatedly found, it affects, quotes, millions of social media posts and speakers all across America. It affects virtually every American who reads, listens, engages, or posts on social media about great disputed political and social questions that federal censors have stuck their fingers into. Third, federal censorship is ongoing and it shows no signs of relenting. Federal officials' censorship efforts are in full swing and they're expanding to new frontiers. Left unchecked, federal censorship will reach virtually any disputed social and political question over which federal officials want to impose their power. Fourth, the Louisiana opinion shows that federal officials are most eager, most focused on silencing truthful speech and to muzzle the most influential critics of the administration and its policies. Tucker Carlson, Alex Berenson, and many others were targeted not because what they were saying was necessarily false, but because it was the most effective criticism of the narrative line that the administration was pushing at the time. Censorship is not about truth. It is about power, preserving and expanding the power of the censors and the political narratives they prefer. Fifth, federal officials are deeply intertwined with what other witnesses have called the censorship industrial complex. The Louisiana court made very detailed findings about the close connections between many federal officials and that mass surveillance and mass censorship enterprise that calls itself the Election Integrity Partnership and the Virality Project. Not just CISA officials, but White House, State Department, and Surgeon General officials have deep ties to that enterprise. As the Louisiana court found, CISA and the EIP were completely intertwined. Sixth, federal officials don't just dictate the outcomes of specific content moderation decisions. They also directly induce changes to the content moderation policies of major social media platforms to ban disfavored viewpoints in advance. And seventh, the federal censorship enterprise has succeeded in transforming online discourse by rendering entire viewpoints virtually unspeakable on social media, which is the modern public square. This ongoing distortion of the most fundamental American freedom, the right to free speech, is intolerable under the First Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sauer. Ms. Wiley, you're recognized.
I'm usually quite loud.
All right. We've heard from the three witnesses who all gave their experiences with federal government censorship, breaking the highest land of the law, the First Amendment, violating individual civil liberties that the American citizen has as invested in the Constitution. So now we go to the Democratic witness, who is a lawyer for the ACLU, Wiley Coyote, I call her. So Ms. Wiley Coyote, who you would think as member of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, would be all in favor of the First Amendment and not violating it. Let's see what she has to say.
I'm usually quite loud, but thank you for pointing that out. Chair Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for having me here today. I have introduced written testimony, and I did have a summary of my oral testimony, and I am going to depart from it after listening to the openings and these.
Just 1 second, I forgot to mention, we know because she's a Democratic witness, it's going to be one of the three holy trinity. That's all I'll talk about. Trump, conspiracy theory, or racism. Which do you think it would be? Or maybe all three in some mix? Probably.
Proceedings. This week began the sentencing of Robert Bowers, who murdered 11 people, wounded 6 others, because their faith was Judaism and because they were in a synagogue to worship. Robert Bowers expressed on social media for a very long time deeply anti-Semitic, hateful statements. He did it and used Gab, which is a platform that was deplatformed by Twitter because of its constant space it provided to hate that has actually become embodied in the most violent anti-Semitic act we know to have happened on our shores in the history of this country. And I will tell you, as a Black woman who lived through COVID in New York City, where we watched too many images of refrigerated trucks with the bodies of loved ones because there were too many deaths to accommodate in morgues. All
right, I want to show you how disingenuous she is. It's performative. Watch the way she says the refrigerated trucks. Like her voice is breaking, it's acting. Like her voice is breaking, but it's not. She's phony. Let's watch. Watch when she says refrigerated trucks, where her voice breaks. She's so phony.
Bowers, who murdered 11 people, wounded 6 others, because their faith was Judaism and because they were in a synagogue to worship. Robert Bowers expressed on social media for a very long time deeply anti-Semitic, hateful statements. He did it and used Gab, which is a platform that was deplatformed by Twitter because of its constant space it provided to hate that has actually become embodied in the most violent anti-Semitic act we know to have happened on our shores in the history of this country. And I will tell you, as a Black woman who lived through COVID in New York City, where we watched too many images of refrigerated trucks with the bodies of loved ones because there were too many deaths to accommodate in morgues that surpassed the deaths during the Spanish flu, and where in this country we have lost over 1 million of our loved ones. And for the Black community, for the Native American community, for so many communities of color in particular, where our rates of death were 3 to 4 times those of some other groups. 3 to 4 times. I want to agree with Mr. Kennedy.
All right, now hold on. I want to point out that she mentions that the rates of death in colored communities are 3 to 4 times higher than in other communities, okay? She points it out. Okay, it's fair enough. Keep that in mind as this goes on, because there's such hypocrites.
I want to agree that it's incredibly important for us to be kind and respectful to one another. It is incredibly important for us to be able to understand our experiences across our differences and to have a platform for those communications. And it is deeply vital that they be based in fact, not fiction. And without regard to the intent or what is in the mind of anyone, which I cannot say, including what is in the mind of any of those who are testifying here today. But what I can say is when you make a statement that suggests that based on race, based on religion, based on anything other than facts, that you may have somehow not been targeted, but other racial groups have, that by definition feeds into something very dangerous in this country.
Now, which is so, notice what I just said? She just said that people of color were hit by this like 3 to 4 more times, and now she says that feeds into something dangerous. There's such the amount of hypocrisies in their mind because they lie and because all they're after is power. The amount of hypocrisies in their mind that they have to store is so much that they can't keep everything straight, and everything that they say conflicts with everything else. And that's one of the finest examples. Just insane people.
That is actually impacting lives, and in some instances taking them. And what I will say about the opinion in this case, and I am here to talk about Missouri versus Biden, is that in this case, we can talk all day about the very specific facts, and there is factual inaccuracy in some of the fact statements in Judge Dougherty's opinion. But the most important one is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, widely believed by all, for very good reason, to not be out of step with conservative ideology, vacated that preliminary injunction. And I want to point to something else.
Not true.
Because one of the things that injunction said
false things
was
that they'll say. They'll correct it
government,
later.
responsible for public health,
Wrong about
responsible for national security, which, by the way, even under the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security said it is
we had lots of
domestic
racism, not Trump.
terrorism that is our greatest national threat. That even that it had in the injunction a statement that the federal government could not collaborate or partner or jointly work with institutes, researchers, including the Stanford Internet Observatory, could not, in terms of identifying, understanding, or even talking about the deletion or removal of anything, even if that research actually demonstrated that those social media companies were violating their own policy in a way that was dangerous for people and for our democracy. So yes, let's be kind, let's be respectful, and let's descend into a real discussion of facts where we can disagree about their meaning, but not about their existence. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. We will now turn to 5-minute question. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes. And we will go a couple rounds here, I think, and then they have called votes, so we'll get the votes pretty quick. But the gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
That's very good.
Thank
Watch
you,
him.
Mr. Chairman. I'm going to focus on the testimony the chairman made reference to, and that the ranking member was so concerned with damage control that she opened her comments about it. And I'd ask staff to put the blow-ups on the screen as we proceed. And Ms. Morris, you can begin with number one while I'm getting my first question out. Ms. Morris, in your statement, you had an interesting turn of phrase. You said that no one denies that the laptop is real. What an interesting turn of phrase, because that's exactly what Twitter was asking about the day your story appeared, and it was interacting still further with Twitter and with Facebook. Ms. Dimlow testified, here it is on the screen for those who are visual learners like me. Are you familiar with the October 2020 New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop? I am. This is Ms. Dimlow under oath. Do you recall whether any of these social media companies you were meeting with asked you any questions about it? I do. Please proceed to the next slide. And here's how, in the same page, but it was relayed to me later that somebody from Twitter, I don't recall who, I'm not sure who, somebody from Twitter essentially asked whether the laptop was real. And one of the FBI folks who was on the call did confirm that, yes, it was, before another participant jumped in and said no further comment. Our stories was whether the Foreign Influence Task Force people, the FBI folks who were interfacing with the social media companies, whether they knew about the Hunter Biden laptop contents that the FBI had since December 2019. So now we know, right? The Foreign Influence Task Force knew it was real. And it wasn't just a few people, it was common knowledge. An analyst on that telephone call before they got their act together admitted that it was real. And then we also know that the social media companies wanted to know if it was real. Of course they did. Because the FBI had been telling them for months to be prepared for a hack and leak operation and also to be prepared for something involving Hunter Biden. Of course they wanted to know. But what do you think about the fact that the FBI, in response to Twitter, told them it was real, then they covered that up or stopped, no further comment, and to Facebook, with its billions of users, said, no comment, we're not going to tell you.
Yeah, we know that the FBI knew that it was real. They knew it was real since not just December 2019, which is when the subpoena that I published is from, which was in the original story, the thanks for the meeting with your father from Ukraine story. We published the subpoena. And they had already confirmed, though, which we would learn later, they had already confirmed that the laptop was real and the quote, not manipulated in any way, quote, in November of 2019, a month before they actually obtained the laptop to keep, which is when they gave that subpoena to John Paul Mac Isaac, the owner of the Mac store where Hunter Biden forgot the laptop. And I think that's something that gets glazed over in this reporting. I'm so familiar with it, it's nauseating, which is that Jim Baker was the deputy counsel at Twitter. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, I'll remind you all who that is. He's the former deputy counsel of the FBI. Like, are we supposed to all sit here and pretend that he didn't know what that subpoena was when he saw it in the New York Post? I mean, let's not insult our intelligence here and the intelligence of the American people. Obviously, he knew what it was.
Point well taken, Ms. Morris, and my time's expired, but what we have always understood, in all likelihood it was true, we now have yet one more piece of evidence from the folks at the FBI that they interfered. Comey interfered in 2016 with the Director Wray himself, who interfered in 2020. We still need to know.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes. And I think we'll do ranking member and one more, and then we'll have to take a break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we talked earlier about a post that Mr. Kennedy had at the beginning of the Biden administration. Just want the record to reflect that that post has not been taken down. So I'm wondering
Yes, it
about the
has.
extent of censorship when the post is still there. But more importantly, again, I go back to just the fact that we are creating a platform for this kind of discussion, not about the censorship, not about free speech, but the content of some of that speech that we are amplifying in this room. I'm appalled and just so troubled by colleagues that I have to work with, that these are individuals who would bring a witness who's promoted a video that compared the COVID vaccine to the Tuskegee trials. The Tuskegee trials were a very difficult time in Black America, where individuals who were already sick.
Remember before we talked about how they said that anybody who brings up anything that's targeted or any racial thing is dangerous and you shouldn't do it? And then and the other one did it right away. She contradicted herself in a minute. Here we go again. They just make up rules as they go along, but they don't abide by their own rules.
With the disease, were then reviewed, experimented on who already had a disease to see how far that disease went. And making the comparison to that manipulates and preys on Black people's feelings about the atrocities of the past in order to prevent them from seeking life-saving vaccines in the present. And knowing that this is dangerous, I cannot also be unaware that this comes from an individual who, by Mr. Roy's introduction, is very smart.
Unlike
and
you.
Understands the implications of this. Mr. Kennedy's own family decries his stance on vaccines, and families disagree on a lot of things. I got family members that, we all disagree, so that doesn't mean anything. But the fact that he has famously sent a request to a party guest that they had to be vaccinated to come to his party. And I'd like to introduce into the record a letter from Louis Silkin, a law firm representing Mr. Kennedy, which states, as he has stated repeatedly, he vaccinated all his children, and I'd like that to be introduced into the record, but tells the Black community and myself, a mother of 5 Black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children,
Never
from
said
a
that.
virus that has killed millions of
She's
people
lying.
because I'm Black. There's no
Race.
secret that this is an amplification of his own platform.
Lies and racism.
I'm not going to talk about the
Horrible
money that's
people.
received from
Really
the
horrible.
Children's Health Defense, from his
No shame.
anti-vaccine organization that's responsible for a majority of the false information out there about COVID.
See how they
And the
always talk about
notoriety
themselves?
that's
False
gained
information immediately.
By
She just told
manipulating
false
Black
information.
and
She starts
other
talking about false
vulnerable
information.
communities to propagate these pseudosciences.
They have broken brains.
Ms. Wiley, are you aware of the phrase superhuman yet subhumanization?
Can't say I'm aware of the
What
phrase.
does this
I
have to do
am
with
aware of the
censorship?
viewpoint.
And can you share what you believe that to mean when it comes to Black people?
Well, sadly and unfortunately, we have a history in this country where Black people were both by law and by social view viewed as inferior and subhuman, and that there were stereotypes attached to that includes all kinds of myth about the ability to disregard both the health needs, health conditions, and disparities that exist for Black people and in Black communities, to the detriment not only of the health of people who are Black, but also to public health by not taking good sound.
Yes, in chattel slavery, you don't have to feed them the same way because they can take it. They can handle that. They don't need as much. Or now with COVID, they've got superhuman genes that they don't need to get the same vaccines that, and
Nobody
they may
said
be
that.
more susceptible if you get vaccines. Ms. Wiley, why do you think someone might choose to target the Black community for false health information about vaccines?
Well, I can't say that I can sit in a position to explain why anyone would do that. I can only say that for those who wished to prevent people from getting a vaccine, it was very clear that one of the ways in which you could convince people not to is to play on fears that have basis in historic experience, sadly, and frankly, and I can say this personally speaking from having conversations with friends, with people I worked with,
And family members.
who were terrified of whether or not there might be some adverse consequences for them because of the Tuskegee experiments, explicitly referring to times in which Black people had been tested on without their permission or denied access to medical intervention despite awareness that it would be detrimental to their health. That distrust has historical fact. We have come to a point where, in terms of the COVID vaccine and what we were being told by scientists, including the ways in which both the CDC, the World Health Organization, and others were examining, were actually putting out factual information, both about the degree to which testing and trials before approval had included people who were Black, people who were Asian, and therefore had more basis in fact to be able to state scientifically.
Time of the
that
gentlelady.
was safe.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
All right. So I want to point out there again, towards the end of that, she talked about how they did studies on how it affected minorities. Okay? Again, okay, whatever. It'd be useful when I point that out in a moment. Let's continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to yield my time to
The
Representative
hypocrisy,
Massey.
watch.
I thank the gentleman from North Dakota. Wow, the irony and cognitive dissonance from the other side of the aisle. It's deafening. You could cut it with a knife. They are at the same time denying that censorship is occurring, but suggesting that there's more material that needs to be censored. This is a hearing on censorship that began with an effort, with a formal motion from the other side of the aisle to censor Mr. Kennedy. They do not want him to speak, yet that is the topic of this hearing. They have kept him from speaking. A collusion between the government and private organizations. Mr. Kennedy, in your opening statement, you introduced us to this word malinformation. Can you tell us more about this made-up word, what it means, and some of the things that you've said or tried to say that you've been censored for that's been characterized as malinformation?
Yes, Congressman Massey, and if by your leave, I'd like to just respond
Please.
briefly to some of the what I would call defamations that have been just applied to me by the ranking member. I'm happy to talk to you about my opinions on these issues.
The horrible things she said, just vile, all those lies over and over and over again. He's got a lot of patience. Watch, he's very kind. Unlike
What
she
you have
is.
stated and tried to associate me with through guilt by association is simply inaccurate. Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vaxxed. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. The only thing I've asked for, and my views are constantly misrepresented so that the truth of what I believe is not, we're not allowed to have a conversation about that with the American people, which I believe vaccines should be tested with the same rigor as other medicines and medications. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you
Time
had the
belongs to the
replacement
gentleman
theory.
from-
I said my colleagues.
Time belongs to the gentleman from.
I denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. Our film on a medical, by the way,
Medical apartheid?
Bill Buxton, who is the black CDC official who ultimately exposed the Tuskegee experiment, tried for years and years to appeal to CDC to stop it for 40 years. Finally, he got relief by walking into my uncle's office in the building next door, and he held hearings and ended the experiment. I remember that very well. And to say that I created a film that encourages blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words.
It's the witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm not censoring the witness. I'm not censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's
I don't
my
have the
time, and I've
ability to-
given it to the witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, have attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks. And answer very quickly to your question, the term malinformation was coined to describe information that Facebook and Twitter and the other social media sites understood was true, but that the White House and other federal agencies wanted censored anyway for political reasons because it challenged official orthodoxies. I'll give you one example. I was included in a group called the Disinformation Dozen. And Facebook and others were asked to censor us, which they did. And by the way, my Heck Aaron post, it was taken down. My whole Instagram account with 900,000 people was taken down because of that. Oh, they knew, Facebook knew that the Disinformation Dozen claim, and what they said was that Disinformation Dozen came from this very shady group called the Center for Preventing Digital Hate in England that's funded by dark money, that should be looked into. They claim that 65% of the vaccine misinformation on the internet was generated by those 12 people. Facebook itself said that is impossible. That is false information. We know that not to be true. And yet, when the White House asked them to censor this Disinformation Dozen, including me, they did it anyway, when they knew it to be untrue.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Kennedy, first of all, your father served as the Attorney General of the United States. I'm a former Assistant United States Attorney. Do you believe that it is a proper function and role for Congress and for all of us to question whoever happens to be in the seat at the office of the Attorney General or in the FBI or in upper levels of government generally to seek the truth, wherever it may lead? Make sure your microphone. Your microphone.
That is exactly the function that the United States Constitution assigned to the people to the members of Congress. And I would say this: I don't want President Trump misusing the FBI, and I don't want President Biden. I don't should want anybody.
Amen. And I agree with that completely. Let me characterize my understanding of something, get your perspective on it. Following the 2016 election, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, Peter Marks met with you, to the best of my understanding, regarding vaccine safety, in part as a result of your engagement with President Trump. And at that meeting, you requested evidence of a vaccine undergoing placebo-controlled trial safety tests prior to licensing. After making a show of looking for the document, Dr. Fauci informed you, to the best of my understanding, that the document was back in Bethesda and that he would eventually send the document to you. The document, to the best of my knowledge, was never sent, and that you sued HHS for documents showing and trying to figure out the truth of the matter, and that you found that not one study was done on pre-licensing safety testing for COVID vaccines. After a year, HHS finally sent you a letter stating, we don't have any. This means, to the best of my understanding, that nobody knows the risk profiles for these products or whether they avert more harm than they cause. And as a result, there's no real science behind these statements, but rather guesswork. Is that a fair characterization of what you've experienced?
That is a fair characterization. We had looked for many years to find a pre-licensing safety trial of any of the 72 vaccines doses that are now essentially mandated. They're recommended, but that's effectively mandated for American children, and we have not been able to find any. And every other medication requires, prior to licensing by FDA, that the company perform a safety trial that compares health outcomes in a placebo group and a similarly situated vaccine group. My assumption was that was done for vaccines. We found out that it hadn't been, that it was not, they were exempt. And I made that statement publicly. Dr. Fauci contradicted me, and when President Trump ordered him to meet with me, him and Francis Collins, and a group of my colleagues, I said to them at that time, you've said publicly that I've been dishonest about that. Can you show us a single pre-licensing safety trial, placebo-controlled safety trial for any of the 72 vaccines required for American children? And he made that show of looking through a file, and he said, well, they're back in Bethesda. And I said, will you send them to me? And I never heard from him again, so we sued the HHS under the Freedom of Information Law. After a year of litigation, they sent us a letter which is posted on CHD's website that acknowledges that they are now not able to locate a single pre-licensing safety trial, placebo-controlled, for any of the vaccines that are now mandated for children. These are zero liability vaccines.
And so if I might interject in just limited time, and I hope you can expand on that further. I know my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, will probably expand on this later, but your uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, was a pretty strong opponent of sweeping immunity from liability for manufacturers of vaccines. And did he not introduce an amendment to repeal the so-called PrEP Act, the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, when he was a senator?
Yes, he did. And, the immunity which was passed in 1986, neither the Republicans or Democrats wanted it. Ronald Reagan at that time, who signed the bill, said, and Wyeth was the company that was pushing it, and they were saying that they were losing $20 in downstream liabilities for every dollar that they made in profits from vaccines. They were going to get out of the business if they were not granted immunity. Ronald Reagan said to them at that time, why don't you make the vaccines safe? And Wyeth said, because they're unavoidably unsafe, which is true of most medicines. I'm not anti-vaccine, but I think we need to be honest and we need to have good science. That's all I've ever argued.
And closing out my time here, I would just say this. My father had polio. I understand the ravages of that disease. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to have polio vaccine, but I also want the truth being sought. I want to know the health impacts of the polio vaccine going forward and every other vaccine that's being administered. And I'll just close by saying and asking, I know that this is informed by a great deal of conversations you've had with mothers and moms who came up to you. And if you could expand on that, I'll yield back.
Yeah, I mean, I was dragged kicking and screaming into this space because I was confronted by, when I was touring the country on suing companies about mercury and fish. And by the way, people, I spent 30 years trying to get mercury out of the fish in this country, and nobody ever called me anti-fish. At that time, we were trying to get mercury out of vaccines. These mothers were coming and saying, my child was injured by the vaccine. These were many, many hundreds, literally, of mothers with intellectual disabilities. And they said, nobody's listening to us. The Democrats aren't listening to us. Republicans aren't listening to us, and I felt like I should listen to them and actually read the science, and that is what got me down into the tunnel. And by the way, it's the worst career decision I have ever made.
Time of the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. You'll back.
Yet one of our Republican witnesses encourages this appalling rhetoric and promotes anti-Asian hate with dangerous and unfounded claims.
Here's Karen Sanchez.
Just last week, Mr. Kennedy suggested COVID-19 was a bioweapon and said it was, quote, targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people, end quote, and that, quote, the people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese, end quote, suggesting that the Chinese people didn't suffer like others during the pandemic. Despite asserting that he should become their president, Mr. Kennedy seems to disregard the correlation between anti-Asian rhetoric and violence. Ms. Wiley, do you frequently work with minority communities, including Chinese American or other Asian American communities?
I do.
And do you think Mr. Kennedy's theory is racist?
I think that Mr. Kennedy's statements fuels the theories that suggest that there's a biology to race, and that therefore we can actually identify people in communities as possibly either being benefited by or being people who are not sharing the same interests and needs as the rest of us. And yes, that has served to drive hate and bias, and sadly, including violent incidents.
So she says, right there, she says that saying that certain communities aren't being served and they're being affected, blah, 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 serves to drive hate. Remember I told you before how they kept on, that's what they were doing over and over again? And they were contradicting themselves, and now they're contradicting themselves again. It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I mean, whether it's stupidity or evil, the absolute pursuit of power is evil. It's an absolute pursuit, no question. I mean, but they just will do anything for power.
Earlier in this hearing, that Mr. Kennedy is a smart man. Now, so far as I know, he does not have any specific education or training in medicine. He is not an epidemiologist, one who studies infectious diseases. He has never conducted clinical trials in a professional setting. He has never done scientific research in a professional laboratory and published scientific findings in a peer-reviewed publication. Ms. Wiley, what kind of harm does someone with absolutely no medical training or knowledge do when they espouse unfounded anti-Asian vaccine theories during a fraught time like COVID?
One of the things that happened in this historic pandemic was that there was certainly a need to get on top of very quickly what the science said. I am not a scientist either. And so what social media platforms did was go and speak to government agencies because their own policies, their own user agreements required them to look and figure out what the facts were so that they could assess what was responsible and what was not responsible to post. I say that because it was incredibly important to ensure that people were getting real-time information as possible, but also ones that really demonstrated what all of us need, rather than where and how we should ascribe blame, or where and how we should consider who benefits and who doesn't, because we were all harmed. But I say this in part because it was the social media platforms themselves that reached out to government agencies, including Health and Human Services and CDC, to get that information. And under the vacated opinion, it's really important to understand, it has been vacated by the Fifth Circuit, this preliminary injunction on all these incidents we're talking about, because one of the things it would do, in my view, just as in my legal view, is that it was actually saying that the government could not respond to such requests under this injunction, which is incredibly overbroad, dangerous, and doesn't allow government agencies to do what they are chartered to do.
These social media platforms have user policies to try to prevent that kind of harm. Is that not correct, Ms. Wiley?
That is correct.
And so we are not trying to censor speech. We are simply trying to create factually correct information to prevent harm to people, including death. And that's what they were trying to do during COVID. Is that not correct?
Legally speaking, absolutely. And I say that as a matter of law, which is that court cases say that the government has in fact, it's its role to ask for compliance with policies. The policies on the books of social media platforms were violated. And they
Excuse
said
me,
those...
Mr. Chairman, but the last questioner got an additional extra minute. I'm at 35 seconds over, which
Point
is
of order,
that
Mr.
she
Chairman.
be
The
able to
Democrat
finish-
beforehand got an extra
finish
minute.
her sentence.
Trying to be generous.
Finish her
trying to
sentence.
be generous, even when the response is that the government determines the truth.
I
I'm trying
would
to be
like for her
generous.
to be able to finish her sentence, Mr. Chairman, then I will yield back.
Okay, Ms. Wiley, you can finish your sentence.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I remember the sentence, but
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
I just think the
I
point
do.
was, it was...
I do. You were saying
there's
the
a
government
record-
should be the arbiter
Can
of
you
what's
please
truth.
not put
That's
words
actually-
into the mouth of the witness and let her respond? It's
Chair now
her
recognizes the
answer.
gentlelady from New York, the gentlelady from California.
I love how you follow the rules,
Time
Mr.
is-
Chairman. It's
time is-
really indicative of
Time.
That's what she was doing. She's saying she wants the government to be the arbiter of truth. The ACLU. The representative of the ACLU is saying that the government should be the one who determines what you can say. Unbelievable. No shame. Let's continue.
report this is and what a circus it is.
By the
But
chair.
racism,
It's
Trump,
censorship by the
conspiracy
chair.
theory.
Oh, Lord.
Thank you,
Gentlelady
Mr.
from New
Chairman.
York.
Fear,
Thank you,
fear.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morris, isn't it true that your October 2020 Hunter Biden laptop from hell story has proven to be 100% factually accurate?
I was 27 when I published that story. It better have been.
Isn't it true that the FBI obtained Hunter Biden's laptop a full 10 months before your story broke?
That's correct, according to the subpoena that I published.
Isn't it also true that we now know that the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force coerced social media companies into an alleged forthcoming Russian, quote, hack and leak operation, and as a result, illegally censored the Hunter Biden laptop story? Isn't that true?
Yes.
And this forced censorship by government agencies like the FBI was paid for by the taxpayer, since the taxpayers fund the FBI. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And Hunter Biden's laptop from hell, it has everything. It's a hellhole and cesspool of corruption and criminal conduct. It has hard drugs, prostitution, pornography, money laundering. It has Biden family shell companies, communist Chinese, corrupt foreign government deals for tens of millions of dollars in exchange for access to the Biden family. The Hunter Biden laptop from hell has all of this, correct?
Yeah.
And the American people are smart. They know that this was not a hack and dump. This was illegal government censorship to protect and prop up Joe Biden on the eve of the 2020 election. And according to polling, of people who were now made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story, 53% would have changed their vote, including 61% of Democrats. So do you agree that the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story was determinative in the 2020 election, Ms. Morris?
Yeah, there are various polls that say that that there would have been a change in the outcome of the election, and obviously it's immediately relevant to a decision on who to vote for, so obviously.
And do you believe that this government censorship was election interference?
Yes, any censorship of speech prevents your ability to think clearly. Yes, of course, yes.
And Mr. Kennedy, I want to turn to you. You've heard me lay out this example of egregious and illegal government censorship. You've been censored yourself. Do you believe that government censorship is a form of election interference?
Yeah, I think government, I think democracy is dependent on the free flow of information. And if that information is distorted, if the public is lied to, then it interferes with election. And by the way, it interferes with public health. And the Wall Street Journal did an article a couple of weeks ago suggesting that the censorship of important health information cost American lives.
And Mr. Kennedy, I want to ask you specifically about the Hunter Biden laptop story. The total blackout on all social media outlets as well as telecom. You couldn't text the link to the Hunter Biden laptop story. This specifically was a form of election interference by the U.S. government in the 2020 election.
I don't know enough about it. I know that there was censorship on that story and other stories that, presumably could have changed people's minds about the election.
And we know the polling demonstrates that now. People have said they would have changed their vote had they been made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Isn't that correct?
I am not aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Mr. Sauer, I want to turn to you. I want your reflection on this form of government censorship, specifically in the 2020 election, as a form of election interference, and what I believe is some of the most egregious political scandals that I will live through in my lifetime. Mr. Sauer, what are your reflections?
I strongly agree with your characterization of that form of censorship as election interference. The evidence in our case strongly supports that. It strongly supports, and actually we have judicial findings now, that the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story was done at the instigation of federal officials in the FBI at a very high level of that organization. It was an orchestrated campaign of deception that was anticipatory, it was planned in advance, and it was, I think, consummated with the testimony that I hadn't seen before that's been put up today.
Gentlelady from Florida, response to yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we respectfully requested that you rescind Mr. Kennedy's invitation to appear here due to his repeated and very recent statements that spread dangerous anti-Semitic and anti-Asian conspiracy theories and attempted to move into executive session because House rules prohibit public testimony that degrades or defames people. His reckless rhetoric helped fuel anti-Semitic incidents, which for the record are at the highest level in the United States since 1970. They have nearly tripled in the last 6 years. Since you gave Mr. Kennedy a megaphone today, I want to give him a chance to correct his statements and prepare some of the harm that he's helped cause. Mr. Kennedy, you're well educated. So yes or no, please, are you aware that for centuries Jews have been scapegoated and blamed for causing illnesses like Black Plague and more recently COVID?
I am. Those are known as blood libel, and they are one of the worst and most disturbing parts of human history.
Good. I'm glad to know that, of course, that you acknowledge that. Of course, it's true and well documented that this pernicious form of anti-Semitism led to centuries of discrimination, even horrific pogroms and massacres, and it still fuels deadly violence today. Yet last week, you floated a baseless conspiracy theory that the coronavirus was bioengineered to target Caucasians and Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. Mr. Kennedy, your bizarre, unproven claim echoes that same historic slander of labeling Jews and Chinese people as a race, and that Jews, and in this case Chinese people, somehow managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You do see that, yes or no?
You're misstating.
No.
You are.
I quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said. So just ask me yes or no.
I was describing an NIH-funded study.
No, you didn't cite any.
I was describing an NIH-funded study by Cleveland Clinic scientists.
Reclaiming my time. You did not reference reclaiming my time.
Published in USC Medical, which is one of...
The time is...
You will see this pattern. Anytime they ask him a question, he tries to reply. Kennedy tries to reply. Democrats cut him off. Say, I don't want him to answer. Censorship. During a censorship hearing. It's unbelievable. Watch.
I'm reclaiming it. Please ask the witness to stop talking.
You asked me a question.
Reclaiming.
Allow me to answer my question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like about 10 seconds back.
You are slandering me incorrectly. You're saying is dishonest.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Florida.
Defend myself.
Mr.
Time belongs
Chairman,
to the gentlelady from Florida.
I'd like 15 seconds back.
We will be happy to give you that.
Thank you so much. You did not cite any study like you are citing here now during that conversation. You referenced no study at all. You simply labeled Jews and Chinese people as a race, and you also said that somehow they managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You don't see that? You're trying to rewrite history here. A few months ago, Mr. Kennedy, you compared COVID public health policies to barbaric, murderous tactics of Nazi Germany, saying that Jewish people in Nazi Germany had more freedom than Americans facing COVID health restrictions. In hindsight, Mr. Kennedy, do you reject this absurd and deeply hurtful and harmful comparison, or do you still stand by it?
Congressman, what you are saying is a lie.
That you said it.
I did not. I never continued.
Okay.
I never, ever.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to enter into the record when Mr. Kennedy said that. I reclaim my time. In discussing COVID public health measures, you made light of the genocide against Jewish people by saying, and I quote, even Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland, you could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was easy for Jewish people to escape systematic slaughter of Nazis, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp? Yes or no?
Excuse me?
That's a question, yes or no?
I didn't hear your question.
Okay, I said, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp?
Of course not. That's ridiculous.
That's a comparison that you made.
I did
Mr.
not
Kennedy,
make that comparison.
were the measures taken to contain the spread and fatalities related to COVID in any way at all comparable to the murder of 6 million Jews, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Let's be very clear here. There's no legitimate comparison to the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if you're talking about AI, vaccine mandates, or anything else. There is no comparison. And if this were a slip of the tongue, Mr. Kennedy, or a one-off comment, we would all move on. But there's a deeply disturbing pattern. In 2015, you apologized to all those, quote, whom I offended by my use of the word Holocaust to describe the autism epidemic. When discussing efforts to encourage others to get vaccinated for COVID-19, you said Nazis did that in the camps in World War II. They tested vaccines on gypsies and Jews. That was a quote. Like before, you apologized for invoking the Holocaust, saying, quote, to the extent my remarks caused hurt, I am truly and deeply sorry. These are not real statements of contrition or remorse. They are passive-aggressive non-apologies that blame the listener for reacting to the lie you just spread. I'm deeply saddened that this is a conversation we're having today. I have deep respect for what Mr. Kennedy's family did and still does to make life better for all Americans. But what you are doing now, Mr. Kennedy, and the forces you aligned yourself are reckless, dangerous, and disturbing by echoing dangerous claims such as, quote, Jews don't really suffer as much as we do, which you said. Your rhetoric creates a climate of mistrust, antagonism, and even hatred or violence against Jewish people. My own children have been the targets of brutal anti-Semitism on social media. You fan those flames and jeopardize their safety. You've marginalized other groups too, like Asian Americans and the LGBTQ plus community. And worse, you don't seem to care or brush it all off to misquotes and misunderstanding. Frankly, it's disgusting. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for UC.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a study that Mr. Kennedy just referenced, new insights into genetic susceptibility of COVID-19. The main body said that they investigated genetic susceptibility to COVID-19 by examining DNA polymorphism in ACE2 and TMPRSS2. Those are receptors for COVID in 81,000 human genomes, and they found unique genetic susceptibility across different populations. I have another document that I'd like to ask unanimous consent.
See, just to say, Kennedy had mentioned how different type of populations, blacks, whites, Chinese, and Jews, had different death rates. He was pointing it out. And he was saying, by saying that, he was saying, look, I mean, because of this, it's possible for people to, ethnically target. I mean, it's possible because you have these different death rates already. He wasn't saying anybody was doing it or behind it. He was just pointing to a study that showed the different death rates. That's all. It's a study. They wouldn't let it explain. They cut off. They want horrible. So that's what he's doing right now. He's entering the study into evidence.
Objection.
To submit, and this is from the FDA review of efficacy and safety of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. This is dated December 10th, 2020, and it shows that the Pfizer trial and the USDA broke down the effectiveness of the vaccine into 7 different racial categories because this was also a concern of theirs, and it would frankly be delinquent not to study.
And there were different results for different
categories.
categories.
But Mr. Kennedy said it was bioengineered.
He never said that. Never said that.
To target
Time
blacks
belongs
and
to
Caucasians.
The gentleman from Utah is
And spare
recognized for 5
whites,
minutes.
and spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. That is different
Time
than any of
belongs
those
to the
studies
gentleman
like that.
from Utah.
Thank you, claiming my time.
Right. This is my favorite part. This is where a Republican congressman now is going to corner Ms. Wiley Coyote, and she's going to fall right off the cliff. Let's watch Wiley Coyote fall off the cliff.
Thrown at you today. I'm going to ask my questions briefly and give you a chance to respond to that at the end of my time here. Ms. Wiley, if I could talk to you. I know maybe you're busy, with something else there, but do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people should be exposed to?
I I trust that we have a process whereby we can interrogate what we hear and learn from the government, but certainly I expect the government to share facts and information.
That was my question. I didn't say share facts and information. I said, do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people should be exposed to and which ones they should not?
Well, I think I'm struggling with the question because that is not the facts of the case in Missouri. In Missouri versus
I'm not talking
Biden,
about Missouri. I'm not talking about Missouri.
what I was
Hey. I'm not talking about Missouri. This is a very simple question. Do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people are exposed to?
Simple questions aren't easy for people whose entire brain is just caught up in all these cognitive dissonances. There's just too many. In the pursuit of power, there's so many lies. A simple question like that, she can't honestly answer it because everything she said today will just explode right away. That's what's going on, right? It's so funny.
Not aware of any action of the government that tells the American public what facts they should be exposed to.
You're not aware of that?
No, I am not.
Oh my gosh, where have you lived for the last 3 years?
In the United States of America.
Let me ask you, China suppresses free speech. Is that a good thing?
No, of course not.
Iran, mullahs there suppress free speech. Is that a good thing?
No, of course not.
Vladimir Putin suppresses. Is that a good thing?
No, we all agree we should not suppress free speech.
We agree then that the government government leaders should not suppress free speech.
That's a different question. Yes, it is unconstitutional for the government to pass laws that would abridge free speech. That's the First Amendment.
Or not pass laws, but to create pressure that would suppress free speech. They don't. Vladimir Putin doesn't pass a law.
Yes.
He exerts his force and influence to suppress free speech.
Yes, the case law says that the government cannot coerce private entities.
And we agree that's a bad idea, don't we?
Yes, and I would absolutely agree when Donald Trump threatened social media companies with federal regulation shutdown.
Jump.
That's not my question.
Oh, I know, but I think it was consistent to show that we agree.
Here's my question for you. We agree the government shouldn't be responsible for restricting views that the American people are exposed to. We agree on that, right? You wouldn't answer it at first, but it's clear that you do agree with that.
That's a different question.
Okay, so to my question, do you agree with it or not?
I agree that the government should not violate our Constitution.
Do you agree with my question?
Your question is
should the government
whether or not the government...
This is so simple.
No, it is not so simple.
No, I'm going to ask it one time, and it is so simple. A 7th grader could understand this question.
It's not simple because to answer it, she will be completely exposed.
The government be responsible for the views and the facts that the American people are exposed to.
The problem I have is that I don't know of any facts in which the government tells us what to believe.
I'm going to say that you're unable to answer the question, which for me is fairly shocking as an American citizen. Let me ask you now then, having concluded that you're unaware of suppression of free speech in the last several years, what about, for example...
That's not actually what I said, but thank you.
Do you think it was appropriate for the FBI to pressure private companies to censor and take down posts that the government disagreed with? Was that appropriate? I'll give you an example that you were unaware of. I'm glad you're aware of it now. Was that appropriate for the government to do that?
Sir, the only thing that is appropriate for the government to do is what it is lawfully allowed to do both under the Constitution and the laws of this country.
Which is?
Which is to conduct its criminal investigations appropriately to our laws and to our policy.
So they didn't have the ability then to go to these private companies and to say they can't.
There are instances in which, in order to protect the integrity of a criminal prosecution, they may ask. Sometimes news agencies and others
certainly agree with that. Was that the case here? Was there any criminal prosecutions involved with these cases? Not that I'm aware of.
Criminal investigations are not prosecutions, and also the integrity of criminal.
Were there any criminal investigations regarding these examples?
Which examples are those, sir?
For example, anything regarding the Hunter Biden laptop.
Well, there are lots of things that have been said in public media about Hunter Biden's laptop. There was a criminal investigation, in fact, a plea in that case.
Does it bother you that 51 former intelligence officials made a determination that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which they admit, by the way, they had no evidence at all that that was true. Zero evidence that that was true. Does that bother you they did that?
What bothers me tremendously is that while there are a lot of things we should be talking about with regard to whether or not the government at times exceeds its authority, that includes whether or not government exceeds its authority when it tries to censor, interfere with research or research institutions, where any White House official, such as Donald Trump, actually threatens the full power of the federal government, including the threat to shut down social media because they put a fact-check label on a tweet.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
I'd like to submit for the record TIB Insights, a New Jersey-based Institute of Policy and Politics poll conducted of over 1,000 adults between August 2nd, August 4th of 2022 showed that 8 in 10 voters, if they were made aware of the Biden laptop, that would have been determinative in changing the outcome of the election. It also demonstrates that 61% of Democrats, including this poll, would have changed their vote. Submitted for the record.
Without objection, thank you. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Grateful for that segue from Mr. Golden, because we're about to talk about hard evidence here. It's really ironic this hearing is covering the left's censorship of opposing viewpoints, and you've all seen it on display all day long. They've been doing exactly that. They've been trying to bully and defame our witnesses and try to cover up their opinions. They actually began the hearing with a motion to prevent them from testifying. You can't make this stuff up. It's on broad display for everybody. They did the same thing yesterday in the hearing with the IRS whistleblowers. You know why? Because the Democrats are panicked right now. They're panicked because it's impossible to cover up the inescapable conclusions of the last few weeks. Let me give you 2 of them. First, 1, the hard evidence, Mr. Goldman and everybody else, now proves that the Biden family is hopelessly corrupt and has apparently engaged in a long pattern of extortion, bribery, influence peddling, and tax fraud and staggering abuses of power. And number 2, we're highlighting here today that we now know that a growing list of the most important executive branch agencies of the Biden administration are in on it. They've also been corrupted. They've been weaponized to help cover all this up, the first family's crimes. When we summarize all this stuff, it sounds like a premise of a dystopian novel or something, but it's actually happening right now on our watch. This is not conspiracy theories, this is evidence. Our hearing today is to put a spotlight on one more of these incredible avenues of unprecedented corruption and government cover-up. And here again, a federal court has just affirmed all that hard evidence. It proves that the White House, the Department of Justice, and the FBI, among other agencies, threatened and coerced the social media platforms to censor and suppress disfavored viewpoints and conservatives' social media posts online. I'm grateful we have with us today 2 individuals, Mr. Kennedy and Ms. Harris, who were directly impacted by that censorship, and the third, Mr. Sauer, who we're about to speak with, serving as lead counsel in the landmark lawsuit against the federal government on this issue. Let's talk facts. The American people are not aware of the magnitude of this case, Mr. Sauer, and its profound implications, because most of the mainstream media is in on it too, and they're trying to bury the story. In brief, in May of last year, the attorneys general of my state, Louisiana, and the state of Missouri filed suit in U.S. District Court of the Western District of Louisiana. This blatant censorship. They went after the blatant censorship by the Biden White House in 9 of its federal agencies. 2 weeks ago on Independence Day, the district court issued a truly extraordinary 155-page court opinion, a ruling granting the plaintiff's request for preliminary injunction. Mr. Sauer, your lead counsel in that litigation. You referenced some in your opening statement, but let's do it again here because they don't seem to be paying attention. Can you give a summary again of some of the key components of that opinion and the basis for it? I know you mentioned there were 82 pages of detailed factual findings, right?
That is correct. 82 pages, 577 citations of the record evidence. That evidence is drawn from about 20,000 pages of the government's own communications with social media platforms and 6 full-length depositions of senior federal officials with firsthand knowledge of federal censorship practices.
It's absolutely staggering. And now they've tried to bury this and say, well, the Fifth Circuit entered a temporary administrative stay. They granted an expedited briefing and oral argument, however, for August 10th. What's the impact of that? Isn't that routine practice in the Fifth Circuit?
That's a direct quote from the recent Fifth Circuit decision, N. Ray Abbott, which is cited in my written testimony. It's legally incorrect, clearly legally incorrect to describe them as vacating the injunction, which has happened multiple times.
They either don't know the law or, I don't know, they're trying to obscure the facts. That's a theme around here. The White House and the fellow Democrats disputed almost none of the factual findings in the court. Isn't that right?
So far, we've had 2 emergency stay motions from the Department of Justice, one in the district court, one in the Court of Appeals. And what really struck me in reading those is they just don't dispute those 82 pages of factual findings. Almost none of them are directly disputed in what they've filed so far.
So the Democrats don't even try to dispute all this censorship. They can't. That's what they're saying.
Very beginning of this lengthy opinion, the court explains the staggering scope of the government censorship uncovered here. At page 2, the court explains, quote, if the allegations made by the plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack on free speech in United States history. The court called it dystopian, Orwellian. How broad has this attack been? How many Americans have been censored?
There's judicial findings again and again in the opinion of millions of American voices silenced by these efforts.
And it had profound impacts. We know, we just saw the poll in the data that's been entered here, facts, not conjecture, that it probably changed the outcome of the election. The court noted that they suppressed, among other topics, the Hunter Biden laptop story. And the court noted, not you, not me, not Republicans, that millions of Americans were not exposed to that story. Had they been, we know they might have voted differently. We'll never be able to unwind history, but wow, I mean, the profound impacts. What are some of the other categories of speech that the government suppressed with its unconstitutional scheme?
Well, the court made findings on that. I just quote them: opposition to COVID-19 vaccines, opposition to COVID-19 masking and lockdowns, the lab leak theory of COVID-19, opposition to President Biden's policies, statements that the Hunter Biden laptop story was true, opposition to the policies of government officials in power. All were suppressed. And that's just some examples, many other examples in the court's findings and in the discovery in the case.
I so wish I weren't out of time. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Allred from Texas for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time to Ms. Busker.
I thank the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Kennedy's and others here are claiming that they've been censored, but they actually have a huge megaphone. The rules that my colleague tried to bring up are rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this Congress. They did not allow the Democrats to be part of that. And one of those rules was that if information or testimony might potentially defame an individual, that we would go in executive session. No one was trying to stop him from testifying, but not to give him the megaphone that this group has allowed him to have. I also note, in terms of censorship, that the far-right media has already issued articles about me playing the race card. The race card is something that's often used against Black people for bringing up when they see.
I gotta stop there because, yeah, this whole thing, all you've been talking about is blacks, and saying that Robert Kennedy is racist against blacks, which is absurd beyond anything you've ever could believe. Yeah, so that you get a little criticism. Huh. No self-awareness.
Race, hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place. Oh, you're playing the race card by bringing up what is obvious in our lives.
By lying. Speak the truth, just don't lie.
Obviously happening, race. And so you can keep saying I'm race baiting and try and censor me, but I'm going to continue to tell the truth. I want to be abundantly clear about what else is happening in this room. The MAGA Republicans are trying to scare social media companies into not taking down blatantly false information in the lead up to our 2024 presidential election. Chair Jordan knows, as we do, that when conspiracy theories succeed, so does Donald Trump. Russia interfered in our 2016 election. They attempted in our 2020,
Trump,
and they're going to try to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. We note that Russian trolls sought to suppress the black vote by unleashing a torrent of social media posts designed to stoke racial tensions and spread incorrect voting information. In 2021, our national intelligence agencies found that proactive information sharing between the government and social media companies facilitated the expeditious review and, in many cases, removal of social media accounts covertly operated by Russia and Iran. Ms. Wiley, if the government is not able to proactively share information with social media companies in 2024, what is likely to have be the ramifications? And I'd ask that you make your answer as succinct as possible because there's a lot of information I need.
I will just quote one.
All right. Now remember, she's a civil liberties expert here. So she should be answering it from a civil liberties perspective. She's not. I don't know what she's going to say, but I bet she's going to be Trump racism, conspiracy theory, Trump racism, conspiracy theory, Trump racism, conspiracy theory. Let's see which one of these three they're going to babble about.
Mr. Prigozhin, who's been in the news of late, actually said explicitly and openly that they would continue to try to spread mis and disinformation into the United States and interfere with our elections.
Thank you.
Sure.
They know that Russian interference, that is, the MAGA Republicans know that Trump benefits when Russia interferes. The super PAC that supports, the same super PAC that supports Mr. Kennedy and has raised significant funds on his behalf is run by a man named Jason Bowles. Here's Jason Bowles' Twitter profile, as you can see up on the screen. Jason Bowles isn't just a MAGA supporter. He also ran the super PAC for MAGA Republicans Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, George Santos, and in 2022, he supported Herschel Walker. So the person behind Mr. Kennedy's super PAC is an individual who personally and professionally wants the Republican Party to succeed. Yet, Mr. Kennedy is running as a Democrat. Ms. Wiley, will it benefit Mr. Kennedy as well as the other individuals that are supported by the super PAC if social media companies are less able to detect and, if needed, if they determine that it's needed, to remove Russian covert information designed to suppress votes in this country?
It is possible.
Now, again, why is she even being asked this? She's a civil liberties union lawyer. It's such a... And she's there to give certain feed answers and just say, yeah, you're right. I'm an expert and you're right. It's just...
Thank you. I yield back.
Can I yield the remainder of the time?
Lady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Stubbe from Florida for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Kennedy, do you want to respond to that? Can you do that quickly?
Yeah, I've never heard of Mr. Bowles, and I've never heard of that super PAC. This is typical of the accusations against me at this hearing. They are baseless. Every single one I've been subjected to a parade of defamations. If I believe those things about myself, I wouldn't want to hear me either. You'd want to gag me and lock me in a room somewhere. And none of those are true, and they were all of this parade of accusations and defamations were made against me in a way that was calculated to make sure that I could not respond to any of them. Every one of them I'd like to respond to, but I was not allowed to.
So I think it's interesting. There's a lot in this opinion, and I have limited time, but I think illustrating some of the actions that the Biden administration took to censor speech is very important. I'm going to read specifically from the opinion. Explicit threats are an obvious form of coercion, but not all coercion needs to be explicit. I'm on page 97 of the opinion. The following illustrative specific actions by defendants are examples of coercion exercised by the White House defendants. A, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this count immediately. Sounds like a directive from the White House to me to social media companies. Accuse Facebook of causing political violence by failing to censor false COVID-19 claims. F, this is exactly why I want to know what reduction actually looks like. If reduction means pumping our most vaccine-hesitant audience with Tucker Carlson saying it does not work, then I'm not sure it's reduction, implying that they're reducing the information on that. Questioning how the Tucker Carlson video had been demoted since there were 40,000 shares. Wanting to know why Alex Berenson had not been kicked off Twitter because Berenson was the epicenter of disinformation and radiated outward to the persuadable public. And I'm just skipping through here. I'm not even going through all these. Flatterly stated, not to sound like a broken record, but how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? Flattery told Facebook, "Are you guys effing serious? I want an answer on what happened here and I want it today." Sounds like a pretty explicit threat to me. Letter M, White House Press Secretary Psaki stated, and I quote, "We're in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation." Psaki also stated one of the White House asks of social media companies was to create a robust enforcement strategy. Oh, Psaki stated on the February 1st, 2022 White House press conference that the White House wanted every social media platform to do more to call out misinformation and disinformation and to uplift accurate information. Another one, "Hey folks, wanted to flag the below tweet and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process of having it removed ASAP." Sounds like a pretty explicit demand from the White House to me. Again, quoting the opinion, "These actions are just a few examples of the unrelenting pressure the defendants exerted against social media companies. This court finds the above examples demonstrate that plaintiffs can likely prove the White House defendants engaged in coercion to induce social media companies to suppress free speech." Mr. Sauer, in the limited time that I have, can you just comment further on, these are just some of the highlights that are in the opinion, and illustrate to us all of the evidence of the White House censoring the American public and working with social media companies to accomplish that?
It's very telling that the judicial findings are quite specific on the specific threats. So there's several ways you can violate the First Amendment if you're a government official. One is coercion, one is significant encouragement, one is joint participation, where you've insinuated yourselves into private decision-making. The court found all of those present here. And with respect to those White House communications, there's a series of specific judicial findings that these statements were threatening. They were threatening adverse legal consequences. There's multiple findings, for example, that White House spokesperson Psaki's public statements explicitly linked the threat of adverse legal consequences to the White House's demands for censorship, which we didn't know at the time, but now know were being very aggressively peppered on the social media platforms while she was making those public statements. So you have public statements from the White House. Also, White House Communications Director Bedingfield, there's a very specific judicial finding on that. Threatening adverse legal consequences in public if there's not greater censorship. And in private, you've got Rob Flaherty, Andy Slavin, other White House officials saying, take this down, do more to take down borderline content.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman, a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
There's a lot of talk about this preliminary injunction, so I'd like to enter into the record a 155-page court opinion, the memorandum ruling on a request for preliminary injunction in the matter of State of Missouri and Louisiana v. Biden from the U.S. District Court, Western District, Louisiana, Monroe Division, and also the Fifth Circuit's administrative stay, which does not address the merits. I yield back.
Without objection.
Mr. Chair, I'd like the unanimous consent to enter into the record an article that states RFK Jr. Super PAC has deep ties to Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, which discusses the Super PAC title Heal the Divide, which states that only Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can unite the nation and start healing America, and also discusses Mr. Kennedy's discussions with Mr. Trump about working in his administration.
So she's entering into, she already brought up the super PAC of Republicans who are supporting RFK Jr., and she's entering into evidence the fact that these Republicans, and she says it herself, they want to unite the country with RFK Jr. How dare they? And she's actually showing, she's going to say, they want to reunite the country with RFK Jr. How dare they? That's what she's entering into evidence right now. They are nuts. Wacko.
Action. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, I believe is that.
Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that sensational false information spreads much faster than accurate information. From your personal experience, is that true?
It is true, and actually one of the ways that the social media companies, which are the places where the rules are determined, and I think it's important when we keep talking about censorship, that they have the power and the legal right to decide what content is on their site, and we're talking about their policies here and their enforcement or failure to enforce them. We've actually raised alarm bells at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights about the fact that they have not sufficiently enforced their own policies and that this has led to harm, very dangerous harm, which we've talked about. But I just want to point this out as well. The social media companies actually use algorithms to elevate content that it finds draws users. And that's why there is research that shows, far from suppressing right-wing and extremist speech, that actually the algorithms used by social media has elevated them. And that's true from the New York Stern School that has a study out from 2021. That testimony, I think, has occurred in Congress. But even Twitter's own analytics shows that it has elevated conservative speech, which, by the way, that shows, and that research shows, that while we're sitting here talking about this as if there is somehow a targeting of viewpoint.
So that's why we have to censor it. Get it?
It's actually been about targeting whether or not the content is consistent with the policies of the platforms that they themselves set.
So this year, it really is literally putting even more lives at risk for elevating all these, what I think are crazy theories. Because as long as all these anti-vaccine theories continue to spread, it makes people not only question the vaccine, but other vaccines. Would you agree?
I would, and I also want to say it also occurs in our democracy in terms of voting. Mis and disinformation about whether or not voting laws are being violated and whether individuals are violating them have led to death threats. That is also in violation of the social media
Time of the
policy.
gentlelady has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Higgins,
It
for 5
happens.
minutes.
I got a death threat after the last weaponization here.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Wyoming.
I want to thank you, Mr. Sauer, Ms. Morris, and Mr. Kennedy, for your courage, for your willingness to be the tip of the spear to protect all of our First Amendment rights. Mr. Sauer, I don't know if you watched...
Yeah, notice she didn't thank Wiley Coyote. She's not there to protect everybody's First Amendment rights. The person from the ACLU is not there to protect First Amendment rights. Bizarre.
Testimony from Christopher Wray last week, but he testified and admitted that the FBI was continuing to meet regularly with social media companies up until the very moment that the injunction was issued by the district court judge. What that tells me is they're not stopping. They're going to continue to try to further the censorship industrial complex as long as they can, and will continue to attempt to violate our First Amendment rights. We all must be vigilant. Ms. Morris, I want to focus on you today. I don't think that we've talked enough about the freedom of the press, but it's also included in the First Amendment and is as important as any other First Amendment right that we have. I want to thank you for your testimony today, and we all know that the First Amendment is a core fundamental right. Within its protection of the free is the protection of the free press against infringement by the government. Free press has been an institution in this nation which dates back to even before America existed. Americans have always relied on the media to remain informed about the workings of their government and events in the world. This is why the press is often referred to as the fourth branch, using the rights secured by the Constitution as a fourth check on the three branches of government. Ms. Morris, before a majority presidential election, you were prepared to release a factual report about one of the candidates. One would think that the information in your report would be of interest to the American people to understand the integrity of the candidates who are asking for their support and their trust. The facts have been laid out by you and this committee of how the FBI worked with social media to alter their perception of what your story was and to change their policies to censor it. Ms. Morris, your story was obviously groundbreaking news. And as we have learned and uncovered additional information over the intervening 2 years, I can say with confidence that what has been going on with the Biden family is absolutely horrific and undermines the very foundation of our country and the integrity of the people in the highest elected and appointed offices in this country. But it's now, we know that you were correct in what you were going to be reporting. Has there been any estimates, or do you have any general idea of how many people were denied access to your story because of the government censorship?
So there are polls about that. The MRC Media Research Center did a poll about, it said 45% of Biden voters were not aware of the story. But I think it also is an impossible question to answer, because the thing about the censorship was not only that it was, deleted or whatever from Twitter, but also it casted an aspersion on the reporting, on me, that was literally made up. It was made up. And there is a subset of this country where, despite the New York Times, the Washington Post, like literally fill in the blank, like liberal news legacy outlet that they all trust, they just reflexively think laptop from hell, fake, Russia, whatever. And so the effect of that can't be measured, because these people who are spies, who the country looks at as the ultimate authority of truth, came out and said that this was, there was something wrong with it, so you can't measure the impact of that.
And so going back to the legacy media, the Oversight Committee had a very explosive hearing yesterday with whistleblowers from the IRS. Some of our legacy media outlets did not cover the hearing, but they did talk about Taco Tuesday, and they talked about other things that seemed to be of great interest to them, but not the fact that we are uncovering an enormous amount of corruption at the very highest levels in our government. While you didn't know about the FBI's efforts at the time, I would assume that between the Twitter files and what we've uncovered in the Missouri versus Biden case, you now know the role that the FBI played in censoring your work. Do you think the FBI tried to ensure that the American people didn't hear the story in order to change the outcome of the election in 2020?
I don't know how to answer that question, because I'm not in their head. I don't know, the reason why. I don't have a head count of how many Biden voters work at the FBI. I can't assign a motive to them. I can just tell you what happened and what we've learned in the 2 years since this blatant, in-your-face censorship event.
But we do know that the American public were not told the truth about the Hunter Biden laptop and Joe Biden's involvement with his dealings, foreign dealings.
Well, that's it, and that's what pertains to my work and my experience.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back.
I want to thank all our witnesses for being in front of us here today. I know that this has not been an easy couple of hours, but I appreciate your endurance. I'll start with you, Ms. Wiley. 5 days ago, Democrat Representative Pramila Jayapal stated that she has been, quote, fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state. Yes or no, do you believe that statement to be anti-Semitic?
I believe.
Here they go again. They're going to get all tied up in their inconsistencies.
That there is a distinction between any
Yes
conversation
no?
about a government versus a group of people.
So do you believe that each of my Democratic colleagues should publicly denounce her comments?
Well,
and not continue to give her a platform to make statements like Israel is a racist nation? Because essentially that is what is happening here. We are 100% trying to censor one gentleman.
Two different standards.
Because one side doesn't agree with his comments. So in a weaponization hearing about censorship, the left is trying to censor, which I think is absolutely crazy. And I have to bring this up. And since the door was opened, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that there were FEC reports brought up. Mr. Kennedy, you acknowledged that you don't know where those came from. You said that you have no affiliation with those. That PAC, that super PAC, I believe. The ranking member said she was deeply concerned about the affiliation. And we seem to have a guilty by association theme going on here. And so I just have to state for the record that I myself am deeply concerned about the affiliation of the convicted sex trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein, of which the ranking member took campaign donation money from. So I think that's the beauty of the First Amendment, is that we have a right to say what we want to say, but we also have the right to be offended. So I just wanted to point that out.
Plaskett, she took donation money from Jeffrey Epstein. Pedophile Island. She probably was there too.
Glass houses and all. Our Democrat colleague, Mr. Lynch, opened up the door of what does the impact of the continued narrative of weaponization have on the general public? And I think that's really important because what we have seen in the last couple of weeks is irrefutable evidence of the fact that the FBI has not only been systematically working to censor American speech, but they have been facilitating it, and in some cases at the behest of foreign governments. A weaponization report proved that there was a direct connection between the Ukrainian SBU, in which that intelligence service was sending spreadsheets of thousands of posts, in some cases posts that were belonging to the United States State Department. And because we know that the Ukrainian SBU is rife with double agents, the FBI wasn't even vetting the posts. They were simply sending them direct to the social media companies saying, please take these down. So now we have an FBI.
So the FBI was taking requests from the Ukraine government to take down American citizen posts. So if you posted something that Ukraine didn't like, the FBI was taking requests from the Ukraine to take it down. Unbelievable.
It is not just saying that they're going to fight foreign interference, they're facilitating it. At one point even suggesting that they put forward a 24/7 channel where the FBI takes requests from a foreign government and filters it right to the social media company to have those posts taken down. And it was across the board, anti-Ukraine, pro-Ukraine. That right there proves that they weren't vetting the posts. That's a problem. We've established clearly with hard evidence that there is in fact a weaponization of the federal government against the American people, and every single day that we do not acknowledge it is a bad day in America. The pillars of our constitutional republic, not democracy, are being taken down bit by bit because the press is being told they can't ask the tough questions. Ms. Morris, you have probably received threats, you have been censored, you have been silenced. Mr. Sauer, you have been before us many times, and you have expressed the pushback, the threats that you have received. Mr. Kennedy, I can't imagine what you receive on a daily basis from both the left and the right. So I'm going to go to our Democratic colleague, Mr. Lynch, and ask the question, what impact does the continued narrative of weaponization have on the general public? I know he framed this in a way to make a point that it is somehow negative to ask the tough questions, but I'm going to ask our three witnesses here. What are the ramifications if we don't talk about it, if we don't expose it? And I only have 25 seconds, so Mr. Sauer, take it away.
Federal censorship has now stood up to address legal expedience for every form of
Ms. Morris.
It's just this, I can't even believe this is a conversation. Like, this is not controversial or taboo. We live in the United States of America, and you have the right to say whatever you want, to print whatever you want, and to read whatever you want.
Mr. Kennedy.
A government that can censor its critics has license for every atrocity. It is the beginning of totalitarianism. There's never been a time in history when we look back and the guys who were censoring people were the good guys. All of us grew up reading Arthur Koestler, Robert Heinlein, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, and they were all saying the same thing. Once you start censoring, you're on your way to dystopia and totalitarianism.
And I know my time has expired, but Mr. Sauer, you said earlier, censorship is about power. Censorship is about control. And the entire progressive leftist agenda is about nothing more than dependency and control. That is why this is so important. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'd like to quickly play a short video, if we could.
COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
Mr. Kennedy, I have a simple question.
I want to stop because it's just a simple fact. It was a study. It told the truth. So, that's all I said. said the study says these people die, these people tend not to die.
You as an early victim of COVID, I actually got it March 10th, 2020. And my question to you is whether you think I should be worried about my genetics as an Ashkenazi Jew because I did contract COVID.
No, not at all. And that statement that you saw there is a truncated version of a larger statement.
No, I understand. You issued a clarification.
Where I was describing, I understand.
Hold on. I had a simple question. You're now going on and reclaiming my time. Because what
Cut
I
him
really
off.
want to talk about here is evidence.
Censorship.
Evidence.
Don't let him talk.
Mr. Johnson was so eager to talk about what he called the hard evidence, and yet all we heard again was him repeating allegations without identifying any evidence. You can repeat all of these allegations as much as you want, but it doesn't make them true.
Gentlemen,
you are not witnesses. I don't have enough time, unfortunately. You are not witnesses to any of this conduct, and just because you say it over and over, it doesn't make it so. And if we're talking about censorship here, which I believe is presumably the reason why Mr. Kennedy is here, the tweet...
Right. They only have, like, I think it's like, they said 150-page court filing, like 50 cent, and then there's like hundreds and thousands of examples that were filed in court. No, they have no evidence, though. Other than hundreds and hundreds of pages. They can't stop lying.
That you've identified was never taken down. Whatever the government may have tried to do, and I don't agree that it tried to do what you said it did, it wasn't taken down. So how can the government actually censor anyone if there's enough freedom within the companies they're talking to that they reject whatever request that the government makes?
I want to focus now, Ms. Morris, on the laptop. There's been a lot of talk about the laptop being real. And that is true. There was a laptop, it's a computer, keyboard, screen. It is real, but you never got a laptop before you wrote that story, did you?
That's correct.
You got a hard drive.
Hard drive.
And you received that hard drive from Rudy Giuliani, right?
Yep.
Who had been openly associating with an agent of Russian intelligence in the months leading up to your story. You agree with that, right?
Russia.
I guess.
Now, did you do a forensic examination of that hard drive before you printed your story?
We had tech people in the Post looking at it, yes.
That's a forensic analysis?
No, not...
I highly doubt the New York Post has the ability to do a forensic analysis of a hard drive.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself. Hard evidence.
Forensic analysis isn't needed. I mean, there's thousands of pictures of Hunter Biden, his emails, his phone calls, recordings. You don't need a forensic analysis for that.
It said that we're not only witnesses to censorship,
So
we were victims. The Republican website on the House Judiciary Committee posted this story, and it was limited to where it could go.
Wait, hold on. Look how mad she is. Look how mad she is in the corner there. She's so pissed off because all of her power, dreams of power, are being shot down. And infuriates them. The loss of power, look at her. She's so mad that she's losing power.
They exercise censorship of the House Judiciary Republican account, for goodness sake. Ms. Wiley, you were a lawyer for the ACLU?
It was.
Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the ACLU defended they were the champions of the First Amendment. You remember that? Remember that, ACLU?
I remember when the ACLU represented Nazis who they were appalled by.
Appalled, disgusted by, and yet they would defend the crazy things they said, right? That's how much the First Amendment meant to them, right?
Exactly.
I want to go back to where Mr. Stubbe was. I want to talk about this hard evidence that Mr. Goldman says doesn't exist. I want to read from the facts. This is what the White House was saying. I want to go to just 3 statements. One, cannot stress this is statements from the Biden White House to social media, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this account immediately. Same kind of thing they put on yours, remove ASAP. But here's the better one. Here's the better one. Mr. Flaherty, who ran this COVID operation misinformation concept at the White House, Mr. Flaherty said this, not to sound like a broken record, how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? And we should just translate that because this is real simple. How much censorship are you doing it? How much censorship are you doing and how quickly are you doing it?
Unbelievable.
But I think the kicker is what Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said back in 2021. Look at this. Now think about this.
Punch them.
The press secretary,
They don't.
we're talking about the White
Censor.
House, considered the center of freedom on the planet. The press secretary in the press room says this. We are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, their definition, of course. Psaki also stated one of the White House asks was of social media companies to create a robust enforcement strategy. So you got the press secretary in the press room in the White House saying we're going to limit the press. Now that is frightening. That is frightening. And Ms. Wiley from the ACLU, lawyer with the ACLU, thinks that's somehow appropriate. We know it's not. And their number one target, Mr. Kennedy, was you. Was you, a Democrat, their primary opponent. I find that amazing. And I would like any thoughts you may have on that, because here's the scary thing. And Dennis and I had this conversation a while back. If you don't have a robust First Amendment, if you try to restrict what the people say and what the press reports, that is a scary place to go. Because if you can't have debate and work out our differences, like you said in your amazing opening statement, let's work together, let's figure this out. But if you can't have that robust debate and figure things out, the alternative is scary. And that's exactly where we're headed. And I would encourage everyone to read Mr. Kennedy's written statement. I read it this morning. Amazing. He walks through the history here. That is what's at stake, and that's why what you're doing, whether we agree with what you say or not, and I disagree with what you said last week, what they played. I think a lot of people did. You've clarified it, but it's about protecting the Constitution and the First Amendment. I'll give you the last minute and a half, Mr.
Well, what I would say is that the founders and the framers of our Constitution knew that democracy was a very inefficient system, and it had all of these built-in inefficiencies and difficulties. But they said that they felt that it would give us the one thing that would give us an advantage over totalitarian systems was this capacity for the free flow of information and a complete lack of controlled debate, so that ideas that would eventually mature into policies would be annealed in a furnace of debate and then rise through the marketplace of ideas rather than being dictated from above. And that's what would give the energy, the vibrancy, the vigor, the democracy. When they invented this democracy, we were the first one in the modern era in 1780. By 1865, 5 other nations had imitated us. Today, it's 190 nations based upon our system. We are supposed to be the exemplary democracy, and the corner foundation stone of our system is freedom of speech. All of the other freedoms depend on it. If we lose that, not only do we lose our democracy in this country, but the entire world loses us as an example.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better.
One of the immutable and undeniable tenets of immunology is natural immunity. But for 2 years, it was denied. It wasn't even just denied, it was censored. Mr. Sauer, I noticed in the court ruling...
natural immunity was censored. I just want to jump in real quick. I mean, natural immunity is what vaccines do. You get a vaccine so that you develop natural immunity. So if you already have contracted the disease, presumably, generally speaking, most smart medicine, from what I have experienced, always in the past, up until just recently, if you had natural immunity, you didn't need the vaccine. That all changed all of a sudden for some reason.
The case that you worked on, that they said that the court said that Facebook reported to the White House that it labeled and demoted posts suggesting natural immunity to a COVID-19 infection is superior to vaccine immunity. Is that true? Was that kind of censorship going on?
Yes, that kind of censorship was going on, and there were direct communications between the platforms and federal officials about natural immunity specifically that I think you correctly quoted.
And thanks to the Twitter files, we found out that the former FDA director who was on the board of Pfizer, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, wrote on August 27th, 2021, to Twitter executive Todd O'Boyle, who, by the way, was kind of one of the go-to people for the White House also to coordinate with when they wanted something suppressed, requested Twitter take action against a post about natural immunity. You know what's amazing to me is Scott Gottlieb, who works for Pfizer, who's a former FDA director, went to Twitter the day I got censored on natural immunity. My post, the congressional post. Now,
they censored a congressman. He could be a witness too.
I said, well, your tweet's still up, your post is still up. What do you mean you're getting censored? What they did is they labeled it and they denied anybody's ability to actually comment on it, and they deboosted it. So I simply said natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. We had studies showing that. They took it, they censored it. So the next day I tried it again with a reference to Bloomberg, hardly a right-wing outlet or conspiracy generator, and they censored that one as well. This is astounding to me. Mr. Kennedy, can you talk about the censorship, the effort of the White House and pharma to suppress the acknowledgement of natural immunity and why they might have been doing that?
Well, again, there was an effort to suppress information, not, in fact, if you read the Twitter files and the email correspondence between Facebook and the White House, there was an acknowledgement that they were being asked and they were complying with censoring information that everybody knew to be true or highly likely to be true. The purpose, and in fact, the term misinformation did not denote falsehood or veracity. Rather, it was a euphemism for any information that departed from government orthodoxies. And it is very dangerous. And, the congressman a minute ago said 1 million people have died because of misinformation about vaccines in this country. But in fact, our country had one of the highest vaccination rates in the world and the worst health outcomes. We have 4.2% of the global population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. Blacks in Haiti with a 1% vaccination rate were dying at a rate of 15 per million population. And same in Nigeria, had a 1.3 vaccination rate. They were dying at 1 in 14 per million population, 14 per million population. In our country, blacks were dying at 3,000 per million population, 200 times the death rates in other countries. And this holds throughout the world. We needed information. We should have all been sharing information openly and talking to the 15 million doctors through the internet who were treating patients on the front line all over the world and channeling the best therapies, the most successful treatments, so that we can all figure it out. This is not a time in a pandemic I'll just say this one thing. Trusting the experts is not a function of science. It's not a function of democracy. It's a function of religion and totalitarianism, and it does not make for a healthier population.
Let me ask you this. You referenced your father and your uncle and the party that they were in. What has happened to your party with respect to the First Amendment? Would they recognize the position now?
I think, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in if you went through a checklist of all of the things that my father believed in, that he fought for, that my uncle believed in and fought for, I would check every box. I feel my party has departed from some of those core values, and one of the reasons that I want to run for president is to reclaim my party for those. But it's got to, listen, this is not a partisan issue. The First Amendment, it just seems crazy to me that anybody thinks that it's okay to censor, and there's a lot of information that I don't like. There's hateful information, but as the chairman was saying, In 1977, the ACLU went out and supported Nazis who were walking through a Jewish neighborhood in Skokie, Illinois. And they said, that's important. We hate what they're saying. We're repulsed by it. But we cannot survive as a democracy if we...
I may not like what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it.
If we're not ready to die for the right for even people who are appalling to speak, the democracy won't work. Unfortunately, there's no other way to control it but through the First Amendment and free speech.
Amen, and thank you for those comments.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Ranking Member, I have one other question I could ask, but I would first give you.
Now watch. I want to stop it right there. Watch how kind he is to her. Okay? Versus, because he's got to do one more thing, he says. So before I do that final thing, which you'll see in a moment, he's being kind to her. See how she acts in the end, once he wants to do that last thing. It's just unbelievable. It's like, are you evil? Watch.
That's the question. I just have one quick question for Mr. Kennedy. I want to be fair. If you got an extra question you want to ask Ms. Wiley or any witnesses, I'll turn to you first.
Mm-hmm. You're nice to her.
Wasn't prepared for that, so
Well, I'm sorry.
just give me a
I thought I was going to get 15 seconds for Mr. Massey, but we weren't able to do that.
Sure. Thank you, sir. I did want to ask Ms. Wiley regarding, we had a discussion and it was brought up by one of the witnesses related to the website Gab. And if you could tell us, it seems to me that while Mr. Kennedy is here, he claims to have been censored, but in reality, his group Children's Health Defense has been allowed to say whatever they want on Gab. Can you share what Gab is?
Gab is a online community that it explicitly states that it wants to create a Christian political economy, and it is a space where researchers have identified a massive influx of extremist and also explicitly anti-Semitic engagement and behavior. Not saying that's about everyone who participates, but that has been...
That the ACLU used to hate, but would allow to speak and would support them and actually be their lawyers, but now she just wants to shut them up. So you're not the Civil Liberties Union anymore. You're just dictators.
Documented. And as I stated earlier, the convicted murderer in the Tree of Life massacre actually spent a lot of time on that, and it was deplatformed because it was not adhering to some of the social media policies about identifying that kind of speech.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Actually, I'm going to let Mr.
What
Johnson
did that have to
our-
do with censorship?
our 1 minute
They're
here, but
so
I think he wants to make
dumb.
Well, I can be asking them, Mr. Sauer.
Okay.
I'm sorry that Mr. Goldman left because we talked a lot about evidence. Isn't it true in your litigation, Missouri v. Biden, that Elvis Chan, who was one of the FBI agents in charge of the FBI online censorship program, testified under oath in the litigation, and the court noted it in the opinion, that he had a 50% success rate. In other words, when the FBI brought to the social media platforms content or posts that they said was, disfavored speech for whatever reason, 50% of it was taken down. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
And is there any other glaring piece of evidence that Mr. Goldman might have missed in his review of that outcome? If we've got a second or two here.
There's so much evidence, I couldn't possibly summarize it all. 82 pages of factual findings, tens of thousands of pages of emails and other documents, 6 full-length depositions. And, I just quote what the U.S. Department of Justice attorney said at oral argument in front of Judge Codey on May 26th. He said, "How can I be sure that this won't happen again?" And she answered, "It's not the government's position that this will never happen again."
They're going to censor again.
To be fair, I'm out of time.
And they'd say it.
Gentleman yields back.
In court.
I want to thank our witnesses for being here today.
I remember how kind Jordan was to Plaskett, the ranking member, asking her if she had anybody she wanted to do to before he's done. Now watch. Now watch how she repays his kindness.
Appreciate the work you're doing to defend the First Amendment, and thank you for just very compelling answers and compelling testimony, and the work you've done, and how important this is for the country. And if we don't have a First Amendment, it's just, I'm frightened by where we go.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may not, you may not.
I just
Mr.
want to
Chair,
respond.
Mr. Chair,
I don't think-
time's out, we're done.
Who are you?
I haven't adjourned the hearing, and I don't think you're the chair.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, this,
Chairman's discretion.
I
We'll
know
let
it's
Mr.
your
Kennedy-
discretion,
We're gonna let
but
Mr. Kennedy.
he has had so much additional time.
Well, I think everyone's had
Why?
additional time.
And why? Why are you doing that specifically for him?
Because
I
we
just
don't
want to
opposed to other
explain.
people.
I'm sure the witness,
super PAC.
I'm sure the
On
Democrat
other
witness will be
places.
as short as he possibly can.
No, are you gonna allow our witness to just give another piece? of
No, let him
what-
address the
I wanna
defamatory
acknowledge-
comment that was made about him that's untrue.
That was not defamatory, that is a legal definition that was not met.
I want to
And was
acknowledge
it
information about the
All she wants to do is lie and censor. Again, she's censoring him. They started it. They started the whole thing censoring him, which I cut off. I didn't show it in the beginning, unfortunately. I forgot to show the very beginning they tried censoring him, the very, very beginning. And now they're finishing it trying to censor him. But he's only got his 30 seconds.
that you mentioned.
Done.
Go ahead.
I've just been told that that super PAC is connected to somebody that we have a connection to. It's not a super PAC that I've endorsed, and it's not one, as I said, that I've ever heard of.
Thank the gentleman for that statement, and I thank you for your testimony. The committee is now adjourned.
God bless America. And let's hope we survive this. We can't give up the First Amendment. It's just as simple as that. If we get the First Amendment, we're a dictatorship, and we've lost everything that made America what it was. It's a great country. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. I'm going to be having a lot more videos coming for you, I promise. Thanks.